Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and it's set review time. Unbroken Bonds is coming out on May 3rd, and it is going to have 214 cards, brand new for us to start testing and introducing into our new format, mixing up the game. Plenty of good cards here. I think this is the most 5 stars I've ever given an individual set, so there's plenty to discuss. Let's jump straight into it. First of all, a reminder of my rating system. They are all based on the current standard format with a little bit of consideration to its place in Expanded. I'll more so talk around Expanded rather than give it an extra star here or there just based on Expanded alone. But looking at the top right, we'll see the out of 5 rating that we give the cards. A 1 star is for something with interest but unlikely to see any play. 2 star with some potential for experimentation, but no real obvious applications. A 3 stars where things switch up because they seem to have a place in the game, be it a new archetype below top tier, or could be seen in some current decks. 4-star cards will certainly see play and will have notable impacts on the new decks coming out, or adapting current archetypes. And then 5 stars are the real cream of the crop, key players in top tier archetypes, or a card which will see play across a number of decks as a staple. Those are the ones you want to be on the lookout for because they will definitely be influencing the game. We also have the return of the community majority ratings. Very, very pleased with this one. We had almost 150 responses for the community set review, so thank you so much for everyone who did take part. It's really helped out, and it means that we get not just my own opinion, we also get to see the opinion of the more broad community, how they feel about these cards. As you can see, this is literally the one from Giovanni's Exile, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can see everyone had their votes, and I take the majority's rating. So although people have voted a wide spectrum for Giovanni's Exile, the majority say it's a 2-star card at 36.8%. So keep an eye on those, and you'll see what most people think this card should be rated at. Let's move on to the supporters to kick things off, and Giovanni's Exile is going to be the first of the bunch. As you can see, the community rating it a 2-star, as am I. It allows you to choose up to 2 of your bench Pokemon with no damage counters on them, discard those Pokemon and all cards attached to them. Now, this seems to have some direct influence alongside a couple new cards from this set. There's a Diglett and Rhydon, which are trying to mill based off of this supporter. There's also a Crabominable, which does more damage between the amount of bench Pokemon you have compared to your opponent. Like, the larger the disparity, the more damage you do. So Giovanni has some niche uses in those decks exactly. It's yet to be seen how powerful those will be. I'll discuss them later. But this also seems to have sort of like a Nanu style effect, where you can see that this is going to have some nice moments in games where you can remove Tapu Leles from your board, remove Marshadow, Dedenne, and Mewtwo are 2 more cards that have coming into play effects, and then they just sit and waste bench space. Having this Giovanni's Exile in your deck means you can clear off those bench spaces and then re-bench some more helpful things. So, similar to how Nanu was sort of considered in Zoroark as a card just because you can turn your Lele into a new Zoroark, now we have the option of this Giovanni's Exile for every deck. Nanu was pretty much only for Dark Pokemon, and Giovanni's is much more universal, which is definitely interesting. So I think there's a lot behind this card. I can see him being like a niche one-of in some decks that want to go more aggressive on Dedennes, Leles, Marshadows and stuff like that. This could even overtake Nanu in a Zoroark deck as the one-of tech supporter card, just to remove some stuff. Obviously, the fact that they don't have to have they can't have damage counters on them means that it could be a little bit awkward if there are Shrine of Punishment decks or if there are like Coco spreading decks, which does limit his use. But I think there are definitely some key reasons why he could be useful. For now, though, I feel like he is still quite slow. And, we've seen that sort of parallel style effect done to ourselves. And when it was a supporter, when it was a stadium card, it was awesome. The fact that it's a supporter makes it a little bit slow for me. So I think it's only really a maybe in decks. Only ones that are very either heavy on Lele, heavy on Dedenne, and those will see play. Or it'll be the sort of Rhydon milling deck or the Crabominable fight alone deck where we see Giovanni's really shine. So I think we can only really put him at a 2-star right now because the jury's out on how good those decks are going to be. Green Search is one of the best supporters we're getting from this set. Easy 5 out of 5. The community agrees in an overwhelming majority. And it says, you can only play this card if you have no Pokemon with an ability in play. Search your deck for 2 trainers, reveal them, and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So that's really, really awesome. It's obviously 2 Skylers in 1 supporter card. That's incredible. Skylar was a supporter which did see play in her day. It was really powerful. Obviously, there wasn't the stipulation that you didn't have to have abilities, but the fact that we're getting double value from an already marginally playable supporter card is insanely strong. It's going to really synergize with decks that don't need to play abilities, and it might be a driving force as to why we don't play abilities in our decks in general. We could be moving away from the times of Jirachi, Lele, Oranguru, even Zoroark to an extent. Obviously, those decks will still be prevalent, but we now have the alternate option where we can take the green search route as our draw engine, and it might force about some quad-based decks which don't use abilities at all. In Japan, we have seen some like quad Blacephalon, quad Gardevoir, quad Lucario Melmetal. These are cards we'll all be going over. And then in the likes of Crabominable, where you're not playing any abilities anyway, you just take full advantage of this green search as a fantastic supporter to give you great consistency. And I think there's also Pokegear that we get in this set, which also pushes green search even further, because we can have even more accessibility to this card, and it can help us chain green search as well. So really, really strong effect that many decks will cut ability Pokemon from their deck completely in some instances, just so they can play 4 copies of this card. It can get you into Bull Search, it can get you into rare candies as well. Even if you're an ability-based deck, if your abilities are only on stage 2s, you can have green search for early rare candy search ability, and then you get into your abilities and, you know, either they carry you for the rest of the game, or you can even, you know, once they get knocked out, you can reload with green search and find more rare candies, so you can have a stream of attackers much more easily. So very, very strong supporter card. It will be absolutely defining in some of these decks that will have to weigh up the benefits of playing ability Pokemon or just playing a full-on green search engine. And I think we will see a lot of decks applying this engine to their builds. Then we have Janine. It's a supporter card that says, look at the top 4 cards of your deck, choose 2 of them and put them into your hand, shuffle the remaining cards into your deck. This is really poor. It's an underground expedition, but for the top of the deck instead of the bottom. And it does have minor uses alongside the likes of Magcargo or Pokenav, which can do some mild like top deck stacking. So you can have some prior knowledge of what's on top of the deck, and then you can dig straight into them. But I think overall, we know this is all a very weak supporter card. The community definitely agrees. There's this mild synergy with a Venomoth, which we'll talk about in this set, but I still believe this card is pretty much terrible as a draw supporter in her own right. Koga's Trap is another supporter card that says your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned and confused. So it has to be compared directly to Professor Kukui, because in theory he's just a damage buffing card, and compared to Kukui it shapes up really poorly. It's doing, you know, only 1 damage from poison, whereas Kukui does 2, and Kukui gets to draw 2 cards, which Koga does not do. Koga, in theory, is stronger if you're just trying to set up 2 shots rather than Kukui, which is only really good if you're setting up 1 shots, because you're getting this extra confusion, forcing the opponent to move out the active sometimes, or just maybe make it more difficult for your opponent to attack you. So in theory, that's where Koga is more valuable, but overall it sounds very weak to me. We can push Poison to be more damage than Kukui, thanks to the likes of Surviper, if we have multiple of those on the board, but that's a lot of work. Koga doesn't even give us any hand advantage, and it's not going to help us set up cards at all. So overall, I think this card is very weak. Again, there's that Venomoth synergy. There's also a Kartana in the set, which can put your opponent's active down to 10 hit points remaining, and Koga is activating Poison to finish them off. So there are those very niche uses for Koga, but I think overall he's a pretty weak supporter and just, again, way too slow. It needs to have like plus draw 2 on it as well to even be comparable to Kukui. Lieutenant Surge's Battle or Strategy, I'm not really sure how it translates, but this is a very powerful supporter that have got a lot of people freaking out. You're only able to play this card if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, but it says you may play up to 3 supporters this turn, including this one. So you play the Surge, and then you're allowed to play 2 more supporters that turn if you are behind. This is an absolute godsend for stalling decks. Stalling decks really want to play this because it allows you to chain your Lusamine and be more proactive with your choice. Typically in Lusamine decks, you're Lusamining supporters that you think you'll need the following turn. For example, you can Lusamine Black Plumeria so that you can use it next turn. Now with Lieutenant Surge's Battle incorporated, you can be much more response-based. For example, previously, you would Lusamine Plumeria. If your opponent doesn't attach, you've basically wasted your Lusamine, and you would just have to like Lusamine again that turn, which is still fine. But with Lieutenant Surge's Battle, you can have the instant response of the Plumeria. If they attach that turn, you can go Surge Lusamine Plumeria. Or, if they don't, you could go Surge Lusamine Skullgrunt or Surge Lusamine Acerola. You have the flexibility with this supporter, which really makes Mill much better at reacting to whatever your opponent's doing. It kind of reminds me how Sableye used to play Puzzle of Time, because you could always pick Puzzle of Time to get back into your hand, so you could have those instant reactions to your opponent, rather than having to junk hunt back something like a Crushing Hammer and a Crushing Hammer, because if your opponent attaches no energy that turn, you don't really do anything, you just junk hunt again. Whereas if you had taken the puzzles, you could at least go for like a Trick Shovel that turn and force more pressure on the opponent. Lieutenant Surge's Battle is very similar in that regard, where you will be able to react much, much stronger to your opponent's board state thanks to this supporter incorporated. Obviously, we can do some stuff. We can, like, Lieutenant Surge's Battle, Lusamine back the Lieutenant Surge's Battle, and then play, like, another Lusamine for your Lusamine and another supporter as well. So if there are those turns where your opponent is not doing much, you can still just loop that Surge just to Lusamine a bit more to get even more supporters back into your hand as well. But it also makes you have some crazy Power Spike turns on turns when you don't go for Lusamine. You can go Surge's Battle, Acerola up some damage, and also Plumeria in the same turn. That's another thing that this deck can't really do. You'd have to pick one or the other, and your opponent may start taking prizes that way. When the cracks begin to show, when you're a little bit slow with your Lusamines, you can start dropping prize cards. Lieutenant Surge, obviously, you'll have to have dropped a few prize cards to begin with, but he's going to help you swing back that tempo in your direction so that your opponent can't continue their prize trade. So it's an incredible card for these stalling decks. I think Zoroark Control will be the one that uses it the best, because it can trade into all the stuff you want to have those crazy turns of multiple supporters at once. I also think Regigigas and Hooper will be incorporating just one or two copies because it's Lusaminable anyway. But it seems like a very, very strong card in those decks. Also, notably, there were some quad-based Ultra Beast builds in Japan that were using this. You can see the Buzz Pheromosa Tag Team GX also played a Lieutenant Surge's Battle or a couple copies in their decks on turns where they would get their tag team knocked out, they'd bring up a new one, they'd Lieutenant Surge, they'd double Green Search, they'd find 4 Beast Rings, and they would just use that GX attack to take an additional, like, 6 prizes or something stupid like that. So there's also massive wombo combo potential, because you could go Lieutenant Surge into big combos with the likes of Green Search and other supporters to help you draw cards as well. So there's mad combo potential with this card that can bring big comebacks as well. So very, very powerful. Community were very hype on this card. For me, my biggest concern is how strong Mill actually is in this new format. I think all the fire stuff may be keeping Mill somewhat at bay, because they have so much energy acceleration inherently, and they have so much energy recovery in their decks naturally, that I feel like they can out-resource Mill a lot of the time. So the only reason I'm not giving this a 5-star is that I'm not convinced that Mill archetypes will be strong enough because of the prevalence of fire. So I'm just giving this a 4-star right now, but he is a driving force and a guaranteed include into most of the stalling decks, I would say. So definitely powerful, definitely helps you respond much better with Mill, so he will definitely be incorporated. Molayne is a far less impressive supporter. It says discard 2 Metal Energy cards from your hand. If you do, shuffle a trainer card from your discard pile into your deck. So it's like a dowsing machine, but it's shuffle into your deck rather than get it straight to your hand. And it's a supporter card. This is like doubly worse than Dowsing Mech. Obviously, Dowsing Mech was insane. It also has the stipulation that it has to be Metal Energy. Obviously, Metal Energies are recoverable via Mount Coronet, so in theory, you could argue this is like a free discard of 2 if you are playing that Coronet synergy, which you would have to be doing, really, to make Molayne work. But getting back trainers in this slow of a fashion is terrible. Look about even things like Electro Charger. Electro Power is one of the strongest item cards we have right now, and recycling that would be strong, but because Electro Charger is getting it back into deck and it's shuffled, it's just too slow, and it's not really strong. Molayne is very much suffering the same problem. It's so slow to get this shuffled back into your deck, and we'd have to like find it again on future turns. It's so slow. All I can think about, other than just playing like Ball Search cards that you don't really ever want to recycle, For item cards, it would be disruption stuff, like Crushing Hammers, Max Potions, Counter Catchers, those sorts of things. But if you're doing that, you may as well just be playing the Lusamine loop, because you could be Lusamining Acerolas and Lusamining Guzmas, Lusamining Plumerias. So overall, Molayne seems very, very weak. One of the weakest supporters I've seen in a while, to be fair. He is really, really poor. Red's challenge, similar to how I was saying Molayne is comparable to Dowsing Mech, this is a direct copy of Computer Search, but in a supporter form. So discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for 1 card and put it into your hand. Comp Search is a very powerful ace-spec trainer card, which a lot of people do put into their decks for added consistency. The biggest problem here is Red's challenge is a supporter. Using 1 supporter just to grab 1 key card at the right time oftentimes is not enough. We usually need more than just 1 key card. I think things to bear in mind when you're comparing supporter to previous items, look at the likes of Lycia. This could pull out 2 key cards at one time, potentially. And, you know, Prism Stars are meant to be the most powerful cards in your deck. That's similar to the nature of an ace spec. These cards follow that trait. Lycia can get 2, and she's seeing basically no play. Olivia is one of these cards comparable to, like, Ultra Ball or other ball search cards where you're lumping 2 things into 1 supporter, and it's not seeing any play. I think the fact that we have such good item draw, we have green search now as well, which will outweigh Red's challenge most of the time for items, because items can find just about every card for you. They can find Pokemon very, very easily. We can dig and find more supporter cards if we need to, but supportering for a supporter sounds terrible anyway. We can even use like Energy Lotto if we have to. So Red's challenge only seems valuable at getting key energy cards out of your deck, because we can use trainers for everything else. And that sounds absolutely terrible to me. So I'm going to give Red's challenge just a 1 star, because we already have such a plethora of good search options in the standard format that Red's challenge is just going to be worse than most of the supporters we can play. Ultra Forest Kartenvoy is a supporter card which states, during this turn, damage from the attacks of your Ultra Beasts aren't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. Effectively, it gives your Ultra Beasts the Shred text onto their attacks. Basically, it means they can get through Scoundrel Guard, they can get through Luminous Barrier, and they can be one-shotting these very pesky, annoying Pokemon that people try and wall with. Notably, this, I believe, will not work on Vileplume, because Vileplume is denying the actual attack itself, whereas the Hooper and Ninetales are trying to prevent the effects of the attack and the damage, which is exactly what Ultra Forest will ignore. So I think, unfortunately, it does not cover Vileplume. But the only way I see this card seeing play is if there are going to be these quad Ultra Beast style decks. We saw Buzz Pheromosa as a quad build in Japan. My biggest headache with that archetype is that it's weak to fire, and I'm not sure it will translate over to the UK and US and the Western world very, very easily, because we're getting all of this stuff in the same set. Buzz Pheromosa had its chance to shine pre Double Blaze in Japan, and that's when it was being successful. And now, once the fire stuff is out, no one plays Buzz Pheromosa. We're getting it all in the same set, which makes me feel it's much less likely that we're going to see Buzz Pheromosa as a quad-based build. That was the only home for this Ultra Forest Kartenvoy. Otherwise, we can just use other attackers to get around these Hoopers and a load of Ninetales and stuff like that. So I feel like this will have basically no home to put it in right now. Welder is a phenomenal supporter. I'm really, really impressed by this card. It's a throwback to Blacksmith. This time, it's attaching 2 fire from your hand to your Pokemon. Blacksmith was from discard. But if you do, you get to draw 3 additional cards. That's absolutely insane. It's giving you insane tempo by, you know, taking Fire Energy straight into play, but also giving you extra hand advantage on top. This is kind of what I was saying when you compare Kukui to Koga's Trap. Koga, because it doesn't draw cards, is so much worse than the Kukui. Welder is far better than Blacksmith, which was already a very played supporter, by the way, because it's getting you an additional 3 cards on top of getting insane tempo and getting you extra attackers ready to roll as quickly as possible. We have a lot of fire support coming out in this set, as you would imagine, being, pushing the Reshiram Charizard is obviously one big thing, getting extra energy attachments on that. There's a few other acceleration lovers out there, like Flareon GX, Roaring Resolve Charizard. There's a Blacephalon in this set as well. I think Welder fits this package excellently, and I am foreseeing Fire decks to all be top-tier contenders. So I really do think that Welder is going to carry the Fire support on his back. alongside the likes of the other Fire Crystal card that we're getting in the set, as well as Salazzle, Blacephalon, Charizard. Spoiler alert, I think all the fire stuff is bananas, so they're all going to have very high ratings. 5 stars for Welder. Community agrees, it's a no-brainer. This card gives you value and tempo all in one option, because you're getting extra card draw for your deck, helping you set up, whilst also getting insane tempo by getting your attackers rolling faster. There's nothing wrong about this card, it's absolutely bananas. Devo Spray Z is a first item card that we have to profile here, and it says, choose one of your evolved Pokemon. You may remove as many evolution cards from that Pokemon as you like and shuffle them into your deck. So it does compare differently to Devo Spray. The added benefit, quote-unquote benefit, is that you can remove even more evolutions. So, for example, this Froakie could go straight... a Greninja GX could go straight back down to a Froakie, so you could get extra Frogadier pops as well as Greninja GX pops. Whereas a Devo Spray would simply allow you to remove a Greninja and the Frogadier would stay. So that's the quote-unquote benefit of the Devo Spray Z. The downside is that you shuffle it into your deck rather than Devo Spray, which gets it straight back to your hand. So it's very, very slow. And overall, I think Devo Spray only saw play in very specific niche situations when you're trying to pick up Shock Clock Raichu, basically. And obviously, we still have Evo Shock Raichu. But I think Devo Spray Z, it's still way too slow for that to really work. We do have a couple other Pokemon, like I say, the Greninja, like Rhyperior, which is potentially being pushed in this set because of Giovanni's Exile. But overall, I think this is very weak and compares poorly to Devo Spray, which was already a card which didn't see much play. So I'm going to give this the 1 star. Dusk Stone is a very powerful item card that says, if you have a Pokemon in play that evolves from either Mismagius, Honchkrow, Chandelure, or Aegislash, search your deck for a card that evolves from that Pokemon, including Pokemon GX, and put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it, then shuffle your deck. And this does... this does count as evolving, but you can use this card during the first turn on a Pokemon that was put into play. Insane. Absolutely insane. So this is the combination of an Evo Soda for exactly those 4 Pokemon, but also a Wally in combination with all 4 of those Pokemon. So a item-based Wally is absolutely absurd. Wally was a banned card in Expanded, obviously for some of its synergies alongside like Trevenant and stuff. But overall, the fact that we can cheat evolutions into play on an item card is absolutely insane. The live or die of Dusk Stone is how powerful those 4 targets are. Currently, the Honchkrow GX seems to be the most promising card, and I believe that's the reason why we will see Dusk Stone seeing play. The other options, like the Mismagius, I think is far less powerful, and I think there is the option to play Aegislash in a Tool Drop Double deck, just to give yourself more hit points right now. There's actually no good Chandelures currently in Standard. So right now, Dusk Stone is pretty much just trying to evolve Murkrows into Honchkrows quickly, in my opinion, but that might be good enough. The reason why I'm giving this a 3-star instead of a higher rating like the community is that I'm not certain that the Honchkrow like cheese-based deck is going to work far as much as a Honchkrow Zoroark-based deck is going to work. For example, I don't think a Zoro Honchkrow necessarily will have the space to have Dusk Stones in it, as well as finding the likes of DC on your turn 1 anyway. You have to really draw a lot of cards to get Dusk Stone, DCE, Murkrow down, and Murkrow into your active all in one go. So if that's going to happen, it's only ever going to be in a quad Honchkrow-based build, in my opinion, where you're just playing Marshadows, thick Honchkrow, you know, the Let Loose Marshadow, and you're just trying to literally put your opponent down to a 4-card hand size, unfair GX as quickly as possible, give your opponent nothing to do, and just try and donk them over like 2 or 3 turns. That's where I see Dusk Stone seeing play. Definitely, it's probably like a 4 of, but I'm not sure that that archetype alone is going to be enough. I feel like that archetype is going to be more of this like PTCGO, whoops, annoying ladder deck than going to be a very, very playable standard deck. Whereas I think Honchkrow Zoroark is much more likely to be a very playable archetype. And in that build, it's only a question mark whether Dusk Stone will see play or not. Honchkrow may just be in there as a Ditto evolution, for example. It may just be in there as like a thin 1-1 or 2-2 count into Zoroark. And that's where Dusk Stone is a question mark for me. So currently I have to rate this 3 stars. But do bear in mind, I do foresee a quad speed aggro, unfair, GX, Honchkrow based build. And if that does end up becoming a more top tier archetype, Dusk Stone does have to get pushed higher. Electromagnetic Radar is an easy 4-star option for me, simply because it goes straight into Pikachu Zekrom based archetypes. It states, discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for up to 2 in any combination of Lightning Pokemon GX or Lightning Pokemon EX. Reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. Absolutely absurd. Again, it's this lumping thing, similar to Green Search, how it lumped 2 Skylers into 1. Electromagnetic Radar lumps 2 Ultra Balls into 1, giving that slight lack of flexibility by only being EXs or GXs. For me, this is absolutely incredible. It goes immediately into Turbo Pikarom, and it might push Turbo Pikarom to be a better archetype, because we are also gaining Dedenne GX in this set, which is a phenomenal Lightning-type GX that can draw us even more cards. Typically, in the early turns, when you are a Pikarom, even if you're not Turbo Pikarom, if you are just like the Jirachi Zapdos, you still want to use an Electromagnetic Radar just to get yourself Pikarom and Zeraora in one search. Now you can get Pikarom and Dedenne, or Zeraora and Dedenne, and get rolling even further. So this Electromagnetic Radar is an absolute amazing enabler for that archetype to go down the turbo route all over again. We can Volkner search this card out, so you may only need 1 or 2 copies in your deck alongside Ultra Balls. So I think it'll only ever be kind of like a 2 count in decks, similar to how we saw a couple treasures sneaking into Pikarom turbo builds. I can now see them just getting cuts for Radars. We cut the Lele's for Dedennes, and we draw a bunch of cards. We get our main attacker on board early, and this is just going to really help push Turbo Pikarom, in my opinion. And Turbo Rom may be stronger now if there are other tag team based builds out there. If there's going to be Gardevoir Sylveon, if there's going to be Reshiram Charizard, and if they're successful archetypes, Turbo Pikarom can, outpace them in many situations and at least keep up with them with big damage from tag bolts and from full blitzing, in addition to electro powers and choice band and stuff. So if we are going to move into a more tag team based meta, there are a few promising ones coming out in this set. It makes Turbo Rom much stronger, and Electromagnetic Radar definitely falls into that archetype, so 4 stars for me. Fire Crystal is a big 5-star. This is, again, me just saying it will be a 4 of in the Fire decks. The Fire decks being Reshizard with Salazzle, or Quad Blacephalon, and even some Flareon Salazzle as well. I think all 3 of those archetypes have potential to be all top tier. Like, all 3 of them could be top tier at one time. I really do see the world on fire as soon as this set comes out. It is simply an energy retrieval +1. It allows you to get 3 fires from your discard pile into your hand. Obviously, energy retrieval is in format and isn't seeing a huge amount of play. It's just that fire synergizes so well with its energy cards. Welder, Fiery Flint, Heat Factory, Fire Crystal, Salazzle, they all work in tandem with one another. The Blacephalon needs to have Fire Energies in your hand to do its damage as well, so it can discard them. So Fire Crystal is going to be great resource recovery for that deck. So easy include, definite 4 of in potentially 3 top tier fire archetypes. 5 stars from me. Pokegear 3.0 is a reprint from Heart Gold Soul Silver base set. It lets you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose a supporter, show it to your opponent and put it into your hand, then shuffle the other cards back into your deck. Simple enough trainer card and simply powerful right now. I think, again, because Green Search is out in this set, the Pokegear becomes much more valuable. Back in Heart Gold Soul Silver era, it was sometimes a maybe in some turbo builds, sometimes a maybe in the likes of Reshiram, Typhlosion as well. Just because it could Pokegear and help you find the likes of Pokemon Collector in the early turns, and then draw search on the other turns. This is very similar. We have the option to now play these Pokegears instead of slightly worse options of supporter cards. For example, currently, you can see the likes of Bill's Analysis, Erica's Hospitality, Sophocles, these sorts of supporters coming in at 9 and 10 counts in decks once you've already put in 4 Lily and 4 Cynthia. Now instead we can have Pokegears, so we can search out those Lilies and Cynthias much more quickly and get the full benefit of good supporter cards rather than diluting our deck with subpar supporters. Instead we can just directly access those faster, more powerful ones, and at the same time giving you better options for Guzma in the late game as well. So Pokegear does transition from a great consistency card in the early turns to a nice aggressive card to give you good outs to win game with Guzma. So a very, very strong Pokegear card. I think especially because Green Search is coming out in the set, this is just has to be a 5-star because it will end up being a 4 of, in my opinion, for every Green Search based engine out there. So that alone is very strong. It also gives license to some archetypes to play some more niche supporter cards. The likes of Lusamine Prism Star might be seeing play. The likes of Cyrus Prism Star might be seeing play because we have Pokegear to help scout it out on nice turns where they're going to be valuable. Previously, they've been a little bit too niche, a little bit too hard to find. Sometimes you have to lay for it, and none of that's ideal. So now with Pokegear, you can find it at better times. So I really think it's a nice enabler for some of these Prism Star supporters as well, which is something that is very cool as well. I think basically Pokegear is going to be a trade-off. There's going to be decks that play Green Search Pokegear, and there's going to be decks that play the abilities. That's why you can see the Jirachi, Zoroark, Salazzle. Either you're going down that route to draw cards, or you're going down Green Search Pokegear. That's the two options that we have in Standard. And because this is one of the two options, it's going to be seen in a number of decks. Easy 5-star for me. Surprise Box is a 1-star card. You get to choose a card from your opponent's discard pile and put it into their hand. Giving your opponent hand advantage is terrible. This is essentially a -2 because you lose a card and they gain a card. Obviously, the card you choose is hopefully going to help your strategy. There's a few ways you can try and improve this. Damage-wise, with Gengar, Mimikyu, or Trevenant, which both have Poltergeist attacks. Dust Noir could force your opponent to put basics into their hand, and then you can Dark Invitation them onto the board for you to deal with. Maybe force some GXs into play, but overall, this just sounds terrible. This really is an awful card. I think it'll see basically no play. And if you're a Gengar, Mimikyu, Omastar-based deck, please still don't play Surprise Box. It's still not helping you get set up, and it's still very slow. So yeah, easy 1-star. Zag Pickle, also a very weak trainer in my eyes. Look at the top 3 cards of either player's deck. Choose one of them, and that player shuffles the other cards back and put the card you chose on top of that deck. So you're effectively giving your opponent a dead draw for 1 turn. So it's similar to Absol's Future Sight-based attack that we saw at one point early in Guardians Rising. Obviously, Absol never really saw too much play. It also has the added benefit, quote-unquote benefit, of having the first part of Puzzle of Time text on it, where you could get yourself out of a bad rut. If you look at the top 3 cards and they're all rubbish, you can at least shuffle 2 away, or if 1's good and 2 are rubbish, you can put the good one on top and shuffle the rest back. So get yourself into some better cards. So in theory, you're removing your own dead draw possibilities whilst also adding them to the opponent. Overall, there's just far better ways that we could go about this. I think there's the minor synergy of going alongside an unfair GX attack or a Gardevoir Sylveon GX attack. Once they brick for a turn, you can go for like Zag Pickles. But that's really it. I think overall, very, very weak trainer card. Not really worth it in those two. You know, these are two very strong archetypes, the Honchkrow and the Gardevoir, but I still think Zag Pickle won't see play in either of them because it's just way too slow. Beastbringer is a pretty interesting 1-star for me. I'm kind of fence-sitting on this one. I can see why the community are rating it a 2 as well. It's a really interesting card, and I had to think for a long time whether or not this would see play. It states, if you have exactly 6 prize cards remaining and your opponent's GX or EX is knocked out by damage from the attack of an Ultra Beast card this is attached to, take 1 more prize card. So it's a tool card for exactly Ultra Beasts that want to knock out exactly GXs or EXs exactly at the start of your game because you haven't taken any prizes at this point. I think my biggest concern with this archetype is that the likes of Buzz Pheromosa, Buzz GX, and Blacephalon all have potential to take early pressure knockouts with their Jet Punch options, with Burst GX, and you're basically ignoring that early pressure option to try and gain pressure later on in the game with Beastbringer. The fact that you can only do this when you have 6 prize cards means it's very niche. Either you play a lot of copies of this card just to see it early, and then you have a lot of dead weight in the mid-game, or you go down potentially a Green Search-based route, have only 1 copy, Green Search it out for the right moment, and try and take that big GX knockout and take the extra prize. Don't get me wrong, you do have to jump through hoops to take this extra prize, but taking 1 extra prize should never be easy to do, so there is big payoff potential there. I think if this ever does see play, it might even be in the Baby Blounds deck, where you play this Green Search engine, you have 1 Beastbringer in there, you set up his second attack, you slap the Beastbringer on, and you just discard like 4 fire from your hand, take a big GX knockout, and now you've taken 3 prizes. The reason why I think that's still potentially useless is because you're already a non-GX deck. You'll already have prize advantage against your opponent if they are playing GXs, so it's kind of a win more card in some situations if we're looking at the Baby Blounds deck. because the other GXs that are on this slide all want to take early prize pressure. They always want to take those early knockouts. So I think you're going to be far better off just cutting this from your Ultra Beast based builds and go down different routes. I think Green Search gives this a chance for potential, but overall I do not foresee it seeing play. We move on to a couple of Fairy Charms. There is some nice fairy support in this set. This first one is going to be denying abilities. It says prevent all damage done to your fairy Pokemon. This card's attached to by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon GX and EX with abilities. Obviously, you can see a handful of fairy Pokemon that want to take use of this, and a few ability-based Pokemon that are currently viable in the format. And denying damage from those is obviously going to be pretty big. Zoroark being the probably least impactful of all of those, because your fairy Pokemon are already going to be fine against that for the most part. If you're a Sylveon milling archetype, you're not going to have too much problems against Zoroark in general. And for the Gardevoir Sylveon, they're also going to be playing a lot of heals, and obviously you can heal around Zoroark very freely. So it's not really going to be put in play for this option. It might help out against a Lycanroc, but then again, a lot of the Gardevoir Sylveon tag team based decks are not filling their bench too much. It's just going to be a number of the Gardevoirs and then some Ribombay into their build as well. So you're not too worried about Dangerous Rogue. I think the things you are worried about are the likes of Zeraora and definitely Tapu Koko GX, because the Gardevoir Sylveon is going to flood lots of energies into play, and Tapu Koko can obviously take advantage of that. The one big gripe I have is that the other Fairy Charm in this set is a Lightning Fairy Charm, so that can already get around Tapu Koko. So I think Fairy Charm is only really a maybe right now in Gardevoir Sylveon, which I do believe is going to be a very strong archetype, by the way. So I'm only giving this the 3-star. I do think the Lightning Charm is stronger and is more guaranteed to be in Gardevoir Sylveon. So this is only a 3-star for me right now. Also, nice bonus points for giving Gramble potentially a flip-flop of an auto-loss to an auto-win. Currently, Zoroark is playing so much muck that it becomes a very grim matchup for you. Now, Gramble having the option to add in Fairy Charm ability means that basically they can't touch you. And they can play one blower, sure, but you already have Diantha, so you can recycle this Fairy Charm ability and have a really nice matchup against Zoroark. Obviously force them to gust a bunch of times around and knock out Magcargos and Gurus and stuff, which will already be hurting you, but you're forcing Gust every single turn. If they're Gusting, they're not Acerola-ing, and that can really help out Gramble. So potentially it's a nice one-off to improve your Zoroark matchup, which used to be abysmal for Gramble. So nice little bonus point there for Fairy Charm ability. Fairy Charm Lightning is the one that I'm much more expecting to be played in Gardevoir Sylveon. It prevents all damage done to Fairy Pokemon by Lightning Pokemon GX and EX. Obviously, there's lots of powerful Lightning GXs being played right now. There's Zapdos Jolteon, there's Turbo Pikarom, there's Pikarom in like a Zapdos Jolteon based deck. There's Tapu Koko GX, which is the biggest fear for Gardevoir Sylveon, in my opinion. That's the one that you really need to keep an eye out for, because they can so easily come in and Tapu Thunder and take a big 3-prize knockout that you want to avoid that at all costs. So I think this is a huge card for Gardevoir and Sylveon Tag Team GX. I also think it's a huge card for Sylveon GX as its own milling archetype anyway. Obviously, we are, again, concerned about the fire support. Going to have to find a way for Sylveon to beat those decks. But now, at the very least, you can cover your Lightning-based matchups by having these Fairy Charms. So I think the Sylveon GX milling archetype will definitely appreciate these Fairy Charms. Metal Core Barrier is an interesting tool card as well. If the Pokemon is attached... Oh, sorry. Yeah, this discards itself at the end of your opponent's turn, but it essentially says, Metal Pokemon this card is attached to takes 70 less damage from your opponent's attacks. Similar to a Bursting Balloon style effect, where it will remove itself at the end of your opponent's turn, so you're only really live for one turn at most. But the idea is, instead of putting 6 counters on the opponent's attacking Pokemon, you're receiving 70 less, so you're making yourself even more tanky and impossible to knock out. The biggest issues I have, obviously there's Field Blower, obviously there's Guzma already in the format, so people can get around this very, very easily, and ultimately I just don't foresee Metal decks being that strong. There's too much fire for me to accept that Metal will be strong. I think the Lucario Melmetal has the highest chance of that being the case, but I don't foresee it succeeding all that much. Doublade will want to have more secure tools in play as well for tool dropping, so I think overall the Metal Core Barrier will not see play, just giving it the 1-star. Too passive in my opinion, and it doesn't stick on the board long enough, and we don't have good tool recovery cards, so seems pretty bad overall to me. Next up, we're going to move on to another tool card which doesn't have all that much potential. Secret Hood says, prevent all effects of your opponent's Pokemon's abilities done to the Pokemon this card is attached to. Similar to a Metal Goggles, another item card which hasn't seen much play. The Metal Goggles had a -30 on Metal Pokemon and still didn't see play. Its text was a little bit less, it was a little bit more limited than Secret Hood because it only prevents damage from abilities. But Secret Hood does help cover a few more things. Helps you around Bloodthirsty Eyes, Twilight Eyes, and Power of Alchemy. You could turn on your basic abilities all over again if you Secret Hood when they have a lower muck into play, which could be pretty interesting. Obviously, the biggest card that wants to turn its ability back on is the likes of Coco Prism Star or Jirachi. Jirachi would much rather have an escape board on, but this could end up seeing play in like a lightning deck for very, very niche purposes to make sure that your Tapu Coco Prism Star goes off, even if there's a lower muck in play. But overall, that sounds absolutely ridiculous. Too slow, too niche. Even if you have Volkner try and search this out, I think it's overall just pretty bad. So yeah, overall pretty weak. I've also got the Articuno Werelord style thing here as well. You can try and have the perfect defense against Zoroark these days, because you can defend against Bloodthirsty Eyes as well as Guzma, and you can even Secret Hood your Articunos to make sure it works against Muck as well. So that could be pretty funny, but overall, I think Secret Hood not going to see play. Deserted Power Plant, 4-star in my opinion. The community are very hype on this card, and it's for good reason. This is definitely strong. It's just simple and effective. Each Pokemon GX and EX in play have no abilities. It's a throwback to, well, first of all, Glaceon GX. It's literally the same as Freezing Gaze, but it's instead of Glaceon being active, it's just it's a stadium being in play. And it's a throwback to Silent Lab, which was only for basic Pokemon, but it shut off those abilities, whereas this archetype is shutting off all GXs and EXs. There's obviously some big GXs and EXs around which are taking full advantage of their abilities, stopping Lele's turn 1, stopping Dedene's, and most notably people are overjoicing because it's a denial card for Zoroark GX. Now before I say Zoroark is dead, I do think the archetype definitely still has huge potential. And remember that Zoroark succeeded in an era with Garbodor. Zoroark has before played 4 Field Blower in a Internationals winning list just to make sure it can beat the ability lock archetypes. So having the space in the Zoroark deck to have more answers to Deserted Power Plant is something that will be annoying for Zoroark players, but something that they still may begrudgingly have to do. So I don't think this necessarily spells the end for Zoroark, but it is definitely a big thorn in its side. Having to tech for an extra stadium card is very annoying, and this adds in a fantastic, again, with Green Search and this stadium, it's really pushing some non-ability based decks to be successful. It even pushes, you know, basic abilities like Jirachi rather than GX abilities as well. So very, very powerful, annoying stadium card. I really don't know how many homes this will find itself in, but decks which aren't playing their own abilities can definitely take advantage of this. So the Power Plant is definitely going to be a strong card. How many decks it goes in is my biggest question mark, because I think there's already so many decks that will be going down a Green Search route. There's already so many Jirachi-based draw engines that if Deserted Power Plant does start seeing play, people just move towards those engines rather than the likes of Lele and Dedenne-based. So I think, obviously, this is a great deterrent for those GX and EX builds, but I think Zoroark will be the only one that you're really countering, in my opinion, because the rest have the flexibility to go down different draw engines regardless. So yeah, 4-star from me. Potential 5-star if it does end up seeing play as like a staple, but right now I'm just going to keep it at a 4 because I don't think it's guaranteed to be in a bunch of archetypes. Hilariously as well, this could be a mirror tech in Zoroark where you can take the first knockout and put a Deserted Power Plant into play and just win the game. Dust Island is a far less interesting stadium card. When a player switches their poisoned active Pokemon with the effect of a trainer, their new active Pokemon is still poisoned, and if there is any effect that alters the amount of damage, that carries over as well. So the idea is, you keep them poisoned, people can switch out and rope out and they'll still be poisoned, even with Guzma. I think where you still get away with it is obviously paying Retreat naturally by removing your energy cards from your Pokemon, and Acerola will still get around this because Acerola does not state switch, it states just pick up something and then you are forced to promote. That's different from doing a switch effect, whereas Guzma literally says the word switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench. So yeah, Dust Island is trying to make Poison more relevant. Poison obviously has been memed quite a bit because of the likes of Guzma, because of Acerola being so prevalent in the format that status conditions in general have just seen no play. I think the biggest issue with Dust Island is, again, people are already playing Acerola, people are already playing a bunch of stadium removal, And that just means that people can still get around poison, as well as the fact that they can just pay a retreat as well. So I think really, really poor stadium card overall. Keeping poison, sure, it's great. Maybe there's that sticky mix GX attack you can do with your mucks, and maybe it carries over, but ultimately I can foresee your opponent getting around it in so many ways that it's just going to be more bad cards going into a bad deck rather than the solution to a bad deck's problems. So easy 1-star. Fighting Dojo is a pretty interesting stadium card. It is for fighting energy stuff. The attacks of Pokemon with basic fighting attached do 10 more damage. And if there's a player with more prize cards remaining, the attacks of their Pokemon with basic fighting do 40 more damage instead. This reminds me of the Black Belt supporter that we had way back when in, I think it was Heart Gold or Silver Triumphant, where it was literally a supporter card that let you do 40 more damage if you were behind on prizes. Now we can have this on a stadium effect. That's absolutely incredible. And at the same time, it's very comparable to something like a Devoured Field. Devoured Field increasing the damage by 10 just in general, while you have this added potential huge benefit if you are behind on prizes as well. So there is that, which is absolutely excellent. For me, it's the home that I'm finding trouble for this deck. I just don't know where Fighting Dojo goes in. Other than something like a Hitmonchan special combo-based deck, I don't really see many decks playing basic fighting energy, especially because this does not apply to Ultra Beast. There's this little text down here. So Buzzwole players can't take advantage of this card, which is pretty fortunate, I would say, because otherwise it could be pretty bananas. But yeah, I think this card is just waiting to be busted. As soon as a nice fighting deck comes out that uses basic fighting energies, this card will definitely go into the deck if it is a nice math fixer. Right now, the only math fixing I can think of is you go behind on prizes, use Special Dojo, and then your Hitmontop can do 100 to everything rather than just 60 to everything, because this doesn't only state to the opponent's active, this is just you're doing more damage, and this does 60 to everything if you're finishing the combo, which is pretty hilarious. And also it might be a small math fixer for the likes of Lucario and Zygarde GX based decks, pushing Landsrath into 190 with Diancie banned, and pushing Lucario into 130 without the need of Diancie in play. Could be pretty helpful right here, but overall I don't think those decks are going to get pushed that much. So I'm not expecting Fighting Dojo to see a huge amount of play. Also because it has to compete with Brooklet Hill, which is a very difficult stadium to, replace because it's so powerful at getting you early setup. That's my biggest problem with the Dojo right now. Triple Boost Energy is the only special energy card we gain from this set, but holy is it powerful. One of my favorite cards of the set is Triple Boost. It gives so much creativity and it pushes evolutions, which I love in the game. So easy 5-star for me, and I'm absolutely adoring just thinking about decks that can go for this card. Triple Boost can only be attached to an evolved Pokemon, and you discard it at the end of your turn, but it provides 3 colorless energy as long as it's attached to a Pokemon. Absolutely incredible value. This is going to help push a bunch of different archetypes. Multiple decks that just currently use 4 DCE now have the potential to effectively have 8 DCE. Think about the likes of Tool Drop. Now they can play 4 boost and 4 DCE. Zoroark decks can just play extra boost energies as pseudo double colorless, so you can find them much more often on turn 2. So alone as extra DCE, Triple Boost is already very strong for evolution decks. But there's a bunch of things on screen that can really take full advantage of the Triple Boost. Gardevoir getting an extra 90 damage out of nowhere with Triple Boost is insane. And the other 5 on the screen can all start attacking for just 1 attachment of Triple Boost energy. So Aerodactyl, a 180 out of nowhere. Silvally, one of these forgotten cards, may finally start seeing play because he's going to be cheap enough. He's now a 1 attachment attacker that can turbo drive and power up energies for other Silvallis as well. So you can play DCEs, a small number of basics, and then 4 boost, and you should be able to chain attacks much more easily. Silvally obviously having lots of memory tools as well to help his type coverage, so maybe it's finally Silvalli's time to shine. Nidoqueen is one that I'm really excited to play as well. Power Lariat has the potential to do so much damage. The only thing that's held it back thus far is its attack cost, and that might be mitigated very easily with the likes of Triple Boost plus Super Boost. So a Nidoqueen Meganium Swampert deck is something I'm very happy to start testing. Persian GX is one of my favorites as well from the set, and I foresee it being powerful. And Dugong is another threat in the format, which will definitely be strong thanks to Triple Boost as well. So this has huge potential as just additional DCEs in current archetypes, but also helping push some of these other more fringe ones to the limelight and making them much more viable. So triple boost, 5-star card, in my opinion. We move finally onto the Pokemon, starting off with a Gloom and Vileplume combo, giving a 1-star to both of these. First of all, the Gloom has Irresistible Sense, the ability that says, once during a turn you may flip a coin. If heads, your opponent reveals their hand. Put one basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench. So it's effectively a Captivating Pokepuff effect, which was a trainer card previously, but you can do it once per turn on a coin flip. This might have some niche uses with some mill variants where you can force chunky retreaters onto the board and maybe trap them. It could also be nice in something like a Crabominable deck to force your opponent to put Pokemon into play so that your fight alone does more damage as well. Obviously, bear in mind you're putting a Gloom into play yourself, which is already a Pokemon slot, just to flip coins to hopefully put more Pokemon on your opponent's side. But I believe eventually you would get value out of that if you want to combine Gloom with Crabominable. Overall, I don't think it will. And it's obviously just one of these stage ones that you can always consider as a Ditto Prism Star based target. Forcing GXs into play could be a way that you can win non-GX based mirrors that happen to play, think about Ultra Necrozma. They play Giratinas and Mallies for the whole game in non-GX mirrors. But if you have a Gloom in play, you can force the opponent to put an Ultra down early. You can win the prize trade that way. You can force Lele's onto the board and force, your way into a favourable prize trade in that regard. You could force Tapu Koko GX into play early and stop them getting their Aero Trail off in certain situations. So there are nice applications for this Gloom. It's just that it's a stage 1 and it's a coin flip, so it's not all that reliable. The Vileplume also likes to flip coins once during a turn. If heads, you leave your opponent's active Pokemon either poisoned, burned, asleep, or confused. You get to choose, and the flexibility is actually very strong here. Doing extra 20 or 10 damage with poison or burn could be nice if you're trying to push for 1-hit KOs, or leave your opponent confused if you're going for a 2-hit KO. I think you basically only ever pick burn or confuse from this coin flip of heads, because either you're pushing for a knockout or you're pushing to 2-shot, and confusion can help do that because you're attacking it once, hitting confusion, forcing the opponent to move out the active or stopping them attacking you. So confusion's the best defensive option, burn's the best offensive option. But the fact is, it's a stage 2 and you're flipping coins. Overall, just a little bit weak. The one thing I will say is that there are plenty of other potential Vileplumes in here, and there's maybe a small chance of this being a one-of in a thicker Vileplume deck. Sort of thinking of expanded if they're going to play like a full-on Vileplume list. You just play like 2 ability lock ones, like one of this one and maybe one of the other one. I don't know. Probably not ever going to work, but Vileplume's got a lot of interesting stuff, so I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up being just a random one-of alongside these other plumes. Kartana is a nice basic Ultra Beast. As we know, Ultra Beasts always have something to do with prize cards. This one has, for single grass energy, big finish. It does 10 damage. If you have exactly 4 prize cards remaining, this does 120 more damage. So 130 on the turn you have exactly 4 prize cards remaining. Similar to a Sledgehammer style effect, but you're in complete control of this one because you can force your way down to 4 and then have a big swinging attack. I think Kartana being a free retreater is also definitely worth noting, so it seems to be a nice one-of tech option because at the very least he's a free retreat option for you and never a bad start. He's going to be potentially one of these like rainbow energy based cards in a Zapdos based build, giving you nice grass type coverage to help deal with the likes of Lycanroc and potentially helping you deal with maybe a Magikarp and Warlord tag team as well. So there's some really cool options for Kartana for taking big knockouts thanks to grass weakness. I think the reason why he's much weaker than Buzzwole is that Sledgehammer in general is 30 base damage, which is knocking out the likes of Zorua, and Big Finish currently is just 10 for 1 grass, and that's really weak. So you only ever use this card on the key turn, more similar to a Nihilego than it is to a Buzzwole in my opinion. But the grass typing, if it's relevant, it will see play in the likes of Ultra Beast Zapdos based builds if that archetype survives. If the support moves away from grass weak stuff, aka if Lycanroc starts getting cut away for more sort of water support in Zoroark based builds, then Kartana seems a lot weaker in my opinion. There is a second attack to this card, which does have some people talking as well. False Swipe for a grass and 2 colorless says flip a coin if heads, put damage counters on your opponent's active until it has 10 hit points remaining. Obviously, we do have the Victini to allow you to flip a coin again if you really want to. And we do have a few activators that can put that final damage counter into play. The likes of Poison Barb, the likes of Shrine, the likes of Salazzle can do all that. Even Koga's Trap as well. you can get that final damage over the line to take potentially, you know, a 3-prize knockout all with one attack. This Kartana is obviously an Ultra Beast, so you could play Beast Rings to try and get more false swipes going over and over again. Overall, that's pretty much meme tier and very awkward. I think the only way we will be seeing Kartana seeing actual play is for that big finish attack in some rainbow-based builds. That's really the main home I see for this card, as a nice free retreat pivot at the worst of times. Pheromosa and Buzzwole GX has seen a huge amount of hype from Japan and from the community as well. It's been rated very highly as a 4-star. Many people rating this a 5-star card as well. So what's the fuss all about? Well, it's a 260 hit point grass tag team Pokemon with the Jet Punch attack for a grass. May sound familiar because it actually is identical. You just do 30 and 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Then it has the Elegant Soul attack for 2 grass and a colorless. You do 190. And during your next turn, this attack's base is 60 instead of 190. So far, it reads very, very similar to Buzzwole GX. Because Knuckle Impact starts with 160. Now Elegant Soul has the extra 30 damage. That's the only real difference so far. And then we come to the Beast Game GX attack, which is one of the main selling points of this card, I must admit. It does for 1 grass energy, 50 damage. If your opponent's active is knocked out by this attack, take an extra prize card. So already, that's very, very strong. If you're setting something up with Elegant Soul and then using a Beast Game, you get to take an additional prize. That's already really, really strong. But if this card has at least 7 extra energy attached to it, you take 3 additional prize cards instead of 1 extra. So, holy, this guy can win the game off of 1 Beast Game GX attack. If you Elegant Soul a tag team and then Beast Game to finish it off, you can actually take all 6 prize cards if you have that amount of energy on him. The question is, how do we get that many energy on? Well, we have Beast Rings, we have Green Search. As I've already mentioned, there's the Lieutenant Surge into green, 4 Beast Rings, go, 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 Beast Game GX, take all your prizes at once. There's that option. There's also, obviously, the Vikavolt option. There's the Venusaur option as well. So there are a few options for grass types to get some acceleration going. But I think, really, we have to think that the Beast Game, just for 1 grass, is already doing a lot of value for you. And decks, if they're not playing healing, you can set up quite nicely with early Jet Punches. And against GXs, you can set up quite nicely with Elegant Soul as well. Elegant Soul not quite enough to knock out some Stage 1 GX Pokemon. So you could Beast Game and take 3 prizes off them. And I can see this card a lot of the time getting its value, to be fair. I can see it, you know, similar to how Pikarom will oftentimes take 3 or more prize cards for its own 3 prize card cost. I can foresee this card doing the same thing because it's got that early pressure with Jet Punch. We've got Beast Energy, which can push that into a 60-30. We do have some other grass damage buffing we can do with Lurantis if we really wanted to as well. Not quite as strong as a Diancie. But there are some cool grass type support options for this card. The big reason why I'm foreseeing this card flopping is it being weak to fire. And as I've already mentioned, I see the world in flames when this set comes out, and that really does give me a lot of worry for Buzz Pheromosa. The main way it was seeing play in Japan was literally 4 copies of Buzz Pheromosa as its own archetype. Those are the only Pokemon it would play at times, and when that's the case, this will just get curb stomped by fire. So I think coming into our English expansions, I think it has to find a new way to play, whereas in Japan it saw the most success as a quad build. I think that's simply unviable in our current standards. So giving it a 3-star for its obvious potential and the fact that Beast Game can literally close out games from nowhere because you can literally just bench it, attach energy, and take 2 prizes on a non-GX and win the game if your opponent's not expecting it. So there's literally that tech option. I've won the game potential, and that's the main reason I've given it a 3-star. But I don't foresee him carving out the sort of top-tier archetype he made his name in Japan for, just because we get too much fire support from the next set. Venomoth GX, I've already mentioned a few times because of this Janine and Koga synergy. That's exactly what his attack's all about. Secret of the Ninja does 110 damage, but if you played a Koga, you do 90 more damage. And if you played a Janine from your hand, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon from the attacks of your opponent's basic Pokemon. So we have these 2 options. We have the offensive Koga route, where we can turn Secret of the Ninja from a nice 2-shot into doing 210 damage with that poison, remember? And if we have Janine, we can prevent damage done to us by basic Pokemon. So we can have this nice counter-style archetype where, you know, we've seen how Vileplume is really pesky and stops a bunch of basic Pokemon just running riot over you. And if there are some of these quad, basic-based builds, Venomoth can simply Janine its way through the game and prevent damage being done to it the whole time, which could be hilarious, really. But overall, I think that's very niche, and I think my biggest issue is that this costs a Grass and DCE on a Grass Pokemon that's weak to Fire as well. Big headache for me that it's weak to Fire. I think that could be a death sentence for this archetype already. And the fact is, we don't want to be playing Janines. They're very weak supporters. We don't want to be playing Kogas. They're not drawing us cards or helping us get set up. So having to draw into the likes of DCE, Grass, Venonats, and Venomoths in a constant stream is going to be a struggle because we're having to play these subpar supporters for the entire game. So I think that's going to be the biggest issue here. If you want to play a Grass Stage 1, my suggestion would be Gliscopod. First impression is just far better. It does have the tenfold Retaliation GX attack. You do 60 and shuffle your hand and draw 10. I guess the idea here is turn 1, you tenfold, or sorry, turn 2, you tenfold, you tank, then you have with this 10-card hand the option of either Janine or Koga, and you go down that route from then on. But it feels way too niche for me and probably just not going to see play, so very weak overall. I think we really have to be doing incredible things for grass types to be working in this format. If Buzz Pheromosa is as strong as it is and still won't see play, this card that you have to jump through hoops and is already weak to fire just sounds terrible for me. Arcanine is our first of the fire types. I'm giving this a very harsh 1 star. I feel like the reason I'm giving this 1 star is because there's so many other viable fire decks that this will get caught in the crossfire of people countering fire, and you basically could just be playing the stronger builds of the fire decks. So I'm going to be very harsh on this Arcanine, just because you should be playing the other fire stuff in my opinion. However, in a vacuum, he's not actually as terrible as a 1 star. I can see why the community rated him 2. I'm just going to give him the 1 just because I want people to be playing the better fire stuff than Arcanine, just because there are superior options instead of him. Because he's just going to take the same engine, he's going to be using Welder, Fiery Flint, Heat Factory, all that sort of stuff, the same way all the other fire decks do. So essentially I'm saying Arcanine's weaker than the other fire options, and that's why I'll say he has no real option to see play. But he does have, for 3 fire energy, Grand Flame, 120, and attach 2 fire from your discard to one of your bench. That's great reload for you. If you're using these heat factories and you're doing all that stuff, you can bench a bunch of fire really early. You can ditch a bunch of fire early with a bunch of Salazzles, and then Grand Flame them back onto your board. And then Heat Tackle does 190 for 4 fire, and you do 50 to yourself. 50 to yourself is not all that annoying, because you're a non-GX anyway, and you can maybe tank that first hit and then do just the 50 to yourself, or you do the 50 and you get knocked out regardless just because you go down to 90 hit points and it's not all that relevant. You're trying to up trade anyway on GXs, but it still just feels too expensive compared to the other non-GX options. That's really the only reason why I'm hating on Arcanine. He's not that bad. He might have seen play if there weren't better fire options, but there simply are better fire options right now. We move on to Blacephalon. I think this card is crazy, and I think he carves out his own archetype that will be top tier. He's a 120 hit point basic fire type that has 2 attacks. The first is Brazier. For a fire, you do 10. Flip over one of your face down prize cards. If that is an energy, this does 50 more damage. So you can randomly take early knockouts of 1 attachment. Now, this is very rarely going to be an attack you go for unless it's literally your turn 1 and you missed Welder. But Brazier is something you can do, and it can randomly knock out some basics, which is actually pretty funny for you. But this is the Fireball Circus attack. That's the one we're paying attention to most. You do 50 and discard any number of fire energy from your hand. This does 50 more for each card you discarded in this way. It does cost 3 fire, so the entire deck is going to be focused around getting as many fire energy in hand and in play as possible. Obviously, you're an Ultra Beast, so we have Beast Rings available. We have Welder, which can, give you extra energy attachments. This is likely going to be playing Wishful Batons. That's often the way it's seen play in Japan, or EXP shares, one of the two. And essentially, because we have this Fireball Circus, and because we have Fire Crystal, we can recycle this very easily, take big one-shots, discard them all, and get them all back again with the likes of that Fire Crystal. And that's what the deck's going to be all about. It's a quad build that just plays Green Search, bunch of Beast Rings, bunch of Welders, bunch of Crystals, and that's all it's going to be. And I think it's, blowing stuff up very easily, and it's just going to be a very powerful deck. One of the strongest non-GX decks we have. I think because this also has 120 hit points, it's going to give Zapdos a run for its money. just because it's an annoying hit points Pokemon for Zapdos to get through the entire time without putting down GXs, and that gives the Blacephalon the chance to go ahead in the prize trade. Also because you're going to literally be playing 5 Pokemon, 4 Baby Blowns and 1 Big Blown. You can play Lusamine Prism Star, and that's going to give you insane tempo again and can help win a bunch of matchups as well. So this could help beat out other non-GX builds just because of Lusamine buying you a ton of tempo, which gets you a prize ahead in almost every non-GX matchup. And because it can one-bang GXs and even tag teams, Blacephalon gets a big 5-star rating from me. I think the deck is going to be very, very successful and very strong. It may even overtake Zapdos as the best non-GX archetype we have available right now. Let's move on to Incineroar. This is a Stage 2 Fire type with 160 hit points, nice and chunky. It kind of has a throwback to Dignified Fighter from Empoleon way back in Breakthrough. It has the Strong Yell ability. Your Pokemon's attacks do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. This is not stackable, so you can only ever have 1 Strong Yell live at any one point. But this is a nice ability. Essentially giving your entire board a choice band is actually really strong. Also, quick note on the Litten, it has a nice little, you can draw a card for 1 colorless, may as well. Just giving you a nice basic at the very least. But yeah, I think ultimately there might be some decks where this guy can do some math fixing, but it is still a lot of work to get him going. It's one of those cards where you don't really want to play a 1-0-1 line unless you're a Meganium-based build. You don't really want to play like a 3-0-3 line or a 3-1-3 line because only ever 1 Strong Yell will be live. So he's awkward in terms of how you put him into your deck, and his benefit is obviously there, but I think overall we can have easier damage modifiers overall. So yeah, Incineroar just a little bit below the bar in my expectations. We then move on to Reshiram Charizard GX, the poster boy of the set. It's a 270 hit point tag team, fire type, weak to water with a 3 retreat cost and 3 attacks. Outrage for a fire colorless does 30 damage and 10 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Straight away, this becomes a threat because your opponent is instantly having to play around this card if he's in your active position. They can't just go guns blazing and start swinging it into you. They have to think about how much they're hitting you for, because otherwise you can just outrage them immediately back and take knockouts on their side. With 270 hit points, it's very difficult for the opponent to play around this for the entire game, and that's a fantastic starting attack for this guy. He then moves into 2 big 1-hit KO options. Flare Strike for 3 fire and colors does 230, and this Pokemon can't use Flare Strike during your next turn. Flare Strike is easily enough to knock out, basic GXs, Stage 1 GXs, a number of Stage 2 GXs. With the help of Choice Band as well, you're dealing with pretty much every Stage 2 GX. It also means you can knock out Gardevoir Sylveon tag team as well. So you're already doing a bunch of damage with this Flare Strike attack. And then we move into Double Blaze GX. For 3 fire, you just do 200 flat. But if you have an additional 3 fire, you do 100 more damage and unaffected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. Kind of like a G-Booster style effect where you do this big bunch of damage and also get through any effects as well to get you through annoying walls that they might throw up in your face. It's a little bit awkward to have to go through them for 300 damage, but it's a way to get you through your prizes at the very least. Double Blaze, I think, is a really nice option, especially because it might just be good enough at just 3 energy. If you don't, you could potentially do this on turn 1, bear in mind, because you could attach Welder and just Double Blaze GX immediately going second. So potentially able to do 200 turn 1 is absolutely nuts. And then next turn, either they hit you and you outrage them, or they don't hit you, you attach them Flare Strike and take more prizes. Could be absolutely out of this world. The tempo of this card is absolutely nuts, and really don't sleep on the fact that Double Blaze might be best as just a 3 energy attack for 200, because that's already bananas tempo. This card just has way too much support to be bad, in my opinion. It's likely going to have a thick Salazzle engine to give you some nice draw power, get you into multiple Welders to get you even more attachments throughout the game. There's the option for early Kiawes if you really want to. There's Fiery Flint, there's Fire Crystal, there's Flareon GX, which can be an accelerator and another GX attacking option in the deck as well, also giving you an alternate GX attack option. I just don't see how Reshiram Charizard is not going to be successful. Has so much hit points, does the right damage for, having this great engine supporting it as well. Definitely going to be a very strong card. There's going to be some water Pokemon popping up to try and counter this deck no matter what, obviously, but At the same time, I can just foresee this pushing through and being strong enough anyway. The archetype's really, really insane. I think Reshizard is going to be a top-tier threat for sure. Salazzle also gets the 5-star treatment. We get the return of Roast Reveal. Once during your turn, you may discard a fire energy from your hand if you draw 3 cards. This is insane. It's like a trade, but because we have so much search for fire, it's potentially more free because Fire Crystal can return them to your hand very, very easily. And Fiery Flint is already finding you 4 fires. So it just has immense synergy with everything else. And having multiple Salazzle in play is going to be nuts. Getting you the same amount of cards as a power draw from a Swampert is incredible. This draws more cards than Zoroark. It's a non-GX as well, so it gets around the Stadium card, and if people are going to pick off Salazzles, they're not dealing, they're not taking 2 prizes at the very least. So overall, ability is insane. It's going to be sometimes a 4/4 engine in fire decks. Absolutely absurd card. I'm over the moon with it. A few other notes as well. We have lots of other Salazzles. There's the Hot Poison Salazzle that can do some math fixing and maybe mirror matches for Reshizard, because you can Choice Band and Hot Poison to knock out in mirrors. Salazzle GX offering up Diabolical Claws as a nice late game sweeper card as well. So we may end up seeing like 3 copies of this one and then like 1 copy of either of the other Salazzles or both maybe as well. And there's also the option for us playing Mysterious Treasure Salandits as well. So having treasures in your build gives you better odds of finding Lele's turn 1, Marshallows for let loosing as well. So the fact that we have a psychic option for Salandit is also worth noting, because that can help your consistency in the deck as well. So Salazzle overall, absolutely incredible card, 5 stars from me. Volcanion, much less potential in my opinion. It's a 120 hit point basic fire type that has Flare Starter. Search your deck for a fire energy, reveal it and attach it to one of your Pokemon. However, if you're the player going second, you can search your deck for 3 fire and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. The flexibility is nice. The fact is, you have to be going second for this to get any value. A lot of the fire stuff is already going to use Welder just to get its attachments rolling anyway, and you're not doing any damage. That's why it's different to old Baby Volk, unfortunately. And the thing is, you don't want to play multiple copies of this guy because he's only good if you've gone second, useless if you've gone first, really. Just doing an attachment to the active so that you can attach to the bench or something sounds really weak to me. Although you are pulling an extra card out of your deck in theory. But yeah, it seems like it might be a non-GX attacking option just because High Heat Blow can get through... Well, it can't even knock out Hoopers, but it can get through some other GX and EX walls like the Ninetales. But overall, it sounds really weak to me. I think it has to be played in exactly a Reshizard deck that doesn't have any other non-GXs outside of a Jirachi-based engine. I definitely foresee people going down the Salazzle route with Reshizard, but if there is going to be a Jirachi route for this deck as well, Volcanion maybe becomes a one-off. That's very generous, though. That's the only time I can foresee this card seeing play. We move on to the water types after gushing about fire this entire time. Let's see what water stuff comes out to answer it. This Blastoise GX is definitely a tanky one. 240 base hit points and also has the ability Solid Shell. This Pokemon takes 30 damage less from attacks. That's incredible. So you're constantly having essentially like a choice helmet attached to yourself, but even for non-GXs. So definitely a tanky guy, difficult to get through once you get him into play. And he does come with 2 attacks. The first is Rocket Splash for 2 waters. You do 60 times the amount of water energy that you shuffle from your board into your deck. So the idea is very much going to be you use a Baby Blastoise to Power Squall energies into play, and then you Rocket Splash for damage and shuffle them all back into the deck. The idea will end up being very similar to how Gyarados plays, where you may end up with your deck just being water energy by the end of the game. You're squalling them into play, splashing them back into deck, and you're just doing a constant loop of that for damage. The biggest issues for me, Power Squall is not guaranteed, and at the same time, you're having to set up multiple Stage 2 Pokemon. Obviously, we have the Articuno to protect our early Squirtles and Wartortles and whatnot, but at the same time, we have to have space for, high rare candy, probably a high, green search count as well. Well, we can't even play green search because of Articuno, so we'll have to play Bill's Analysis. Stuff like that is going to be really awkward, so getting these multiple Stage 2s up, even though the Blastoise is huge and tanky, is going to be very awkward for you. We could also go down the route of having a Alolan Ninetales GX. Obviously, the Vulpix is a water type, so you can Brooklyn Hill it out, and Articuno can protect it with Blizzard Veil as well. But as soon as you evolve up into Ninetales, it's no longer protected. At the very least, though, you could help scout out some rare candies and ball search cards and whatnot to get your Stoice into play. It's just the fact is, you're going to have 2 GX and 2 non-GX into play to actually be doing reliable damage with this Rocket Splash. That's my biggest issue. Big Geyser GX is just for a water. You get to attach as many water from your hand to your Pokemon in any way that you like. I think overall that's really bad as well. Like, it's just not doing damage. It's setting up for Rocket Splash, but that's really weak. So overall, his hit points and his ability are the best parts about the card. The Power Squall is just not reliable enough to be good. So I think overall Blastoise is just a 1-star. Dewgong is hopefully the savior of the format for these fire decks. I believe in Dewgong. I think it's a very, very strong Stage 1 card. It's a 120 hit point Stage 1 water type, of course. It has Tail Whap for a DCE, just do 60. This is actually good enough to knock out some basics if you just have DCE turn 1. But if you find yourself a triple boost energy, you can use Dual Blizzard, discard 2 energy from this Pokemon. This attack does 60 to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. This is absolute hell. If you are the one going first in something like a Zoroark mirror match, or if you're against the Malamar deck, they get Dewgong turn 2, they kill 2 Zoruas, or they kill Zorua Ditto, or they kill double Inkay. That's an absolute nightmare. You might have already lost the game just off Dewgong attacking on turn 2. That's literally how scary this card can be. Grinching down basics is so insanely strong, and Dewgong can do that with ease. The other thing that we have to note is that it's of course a water type, so you can one-shot Baby Blacephalon and set up a second Baby Blacephalon with his Dual Blizzard. So effectively, using 2 Dual Blizzards, you will take 3 prize cards and have the chance to overtake Baby Blounds in a prize race as well. So I think this Dewgong is a great answer to Baby Blacephalon and a great mirror option if you're a Zoroark deck, whilst also catching other evolving basics in the crossfire. So I think this Dewgong is absolutely hell to play against because you have to try and, commit your ball search to getting things like Mew onto the board instead of your own Zoruas and stuff. So even if people are searching out a Mew, it means that's 1 less Zorua that they can evolve up into. That's 1 less Inkay and whatnot. So you're basically putting a Sudowoodo into play just by having the threat of a Dewgong turn 1. So this card is absolutely incredible in my opinion. Very, very strong. Reminds me of Fright Night Yveltal from way back when, doing a 60-60, and we know how strong those numbers are. Dual Blizzard being even more flexible because you can put it wherever you want to. They don't have to be active and bench, and not just EXs. So Dewgong, absolutely incredible card. 4-star for me. I think it is almost guaranteed to go in Zoroark. Almost guaranteed to go in Zoroark. Very, very strong. We've seen in Japan the archetype has moved towards Persian Dewgong, and there's also some Dewgong plus Lycanroc base builds. I foresee Zoroark going down the same route to help deal with these fire decks. Dewgong, really, really strong. Community hated on it. I think it's bust. Incredible card. Charjabug and Vikavolt get 2-star treatment from me. This has a really awesome ability, this Charjabug. It's a battery ability. Once during your turn, if this card's in your hand, you can attach it as if it was a special energy to a Vikavolt. It provides 2 lightning energy to the Pokemon this is attached to. So this can only go onto Vikavolt and Vikavolt GXs, so this will only ever be a sort of quad Vikavolt based deck, but I can definitely foresee you playing a 4-4-4 line of Vikavolt using this battery ability because it's absolutely incredible. This attachment does not count the same as attaching an energy from your hand, so you can attach a Lightning for turn and then attach a Charjabug, or you can go Charjabug, attack. That's absolutely incredible. It's really, really strong. So basically using Charjabug as your energy for the entire game is insane. The big issue here is that we're still having to play a Stage 2 deck, and at the same time, the Stage 2s are kind of clunky. The Vikavolt that we get from this set has 150 hit points. It has the Stealth Body ability. If there's any Stadium in play, this Pokemon has no weakness. At the very least, that's nice to keep you nice and chunky against some tech fighting Pokemon. And it has Lightning Strike for Lightning, Colorless. 3 Lightning and a Colorless. You do 120, and you may discard all Lightning from this Pokemon. If you do, you do 100 more damage. So 220 is a really nice number. Also, I like the fact you don't have to discard that energy as well. So when you're up against non-GXs, you can retain that energy. Nice flexibility there. Good damage on the card. I think it's a Stage 2, which is the main thing holding it back. But this Charjabug, just recycling this the entire game with heavy Stretcher in the deck. Just attaching these Charjabugs as quickly as possible to power up these Vikavolts is obviously incredible. We do have the GX and we have Strong Charge as well, so I can see us weaving in some extra lightning support as well into the deck to maybe power up Super Zap Cannons and whatnot. But overall, I foresee the new Vikavolt being the main attacker in the archetype. And I think right now it's pretty strong. it just doesn't quite reach on tag teams without the help of Electro Powers, which this deck probably doesn't have much space for. And we are really reliant on these Charger Bugs, so those are sort of the biggest reasons why I'm not super hyped on this Vika Vault, but I think there's something here, definitely more than a 1-star, and this Charger Bug has an insane ability. Really nice way to try and drive these Stage 2 Pokemon with some creative abilities from their middle evolutions. The Dedenne GX is an impeccable card. When we're talking about this in the same breath as Shaymin EX, Lele, and Sycamore, you know this is of a high pedigree. It's a 160 hit point GX Pokemon, which is very fragile, but it does have a 1 retreat cost. It has a weakness to fighting, which makes it even more fragile, unfortunately. But it does have an incredible ability, Charge. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to your bench during your turn, you may discard your hand and draw 6 cards. You can only use one Dede. I think it's Charge or Change. I don't know how it was translated, but you can only use this once per turn. But essentially, giving yourself a almost Sycamore on an ability is incredible for turbo-based decks. I've already mentioned how the Electromagnetic Radar will help Pikarom be even faster because you can play your Cynthia, you can let loose, and you can also use the Dedenne in the same turn and see so many cards with that deck now. The Dedenne is a huge deal for those Pikarom decks. Having extra discard synergy is also very nice for the likes of Persian GX, if that's going to be an archetype. And I think in general, just having something similar to a Shaymin effect, similar to a Lele effect, where you can just dump and draw your hand is very, very strong. I think this is a 5-star. It's one of these like considerations in a bunch of decks just to give you a new hand, give you hope in the same way that a Lele can get you out of dead hands. Like, this is absolutely insane. Its weakness to fighting is obviously awkward. Buzzwole GX is still around. Fortunately, though, there is a nice tech card for Buzzwole in this set, so potentially it's a little bit less fragile. At the same time, though, 160 is very, very scary because they can easily just get one shot, even easier than a Tapu Lele. So it comes with the same issues as a Lele, but its benefit is equal or better, and in some archetypes it will be better than Lele, so that's the reason why we have to give this card a 5-star. Just these abilities are always very, very good options in the TCG, and Dedenne will always fit in that category. Stunfisk is a pretty fun rogue deck, which some people think has legs. I am far less excited by this archetype. It comes with 2 attacks. It's first for a colorless just of 30, and 10 to one of your bench Pokemon. That's actually some nice mini synergy with its second attack, which is Zap Trap. For 2 colorless energy, you do 30 for each Pokemon with damage counters on them. Each of your Pokemon with damage counters on them. So the idea is we find a way to damage our own stuff, either with early lightning strikes, with rainbow energies, with Potown with evolutions, or with the new Spiritomb that we get in the set, which has an ability that can damage itself. And the idea is we can Zap Trap for a DCE for 1-hit KOs. I think the biggest issue here is we can't play any Draw Engine Pokemon because we need to fill our bench with other Spiritombs and Stunfisk. So we can't use any Pokemon to help us draw cards. Also, we need to find DCE turn by turn without any help of a Draw Engine. And at the same time, Muck will instantly shut down Spiritomb, and then your deck becomes terrible. Also, we need to have Rainbow Energies plus DCEs, which is also always awkward. And when your opponent is just simply Guzmering and knocking out Spiritombs, your damage just goes. So I think this archetype is very, very weak. Zap Trap, you need to have, for example, if your entire bench is damaged with 4 Spiritombs and 1 Stunfisk that you somehow damaged, even that's just 150, and you still need Choice Band and Electric Powers to help push that even more. So the fact that you need to find those damage buffs and DCs every turn, all without draw power, means this archetype is going to be absolute trash. Yeah, I think Stunfisk really does suck. We move on to the Psychic type, starting off with a nice Gengar evolution line. Ghastly comes with a fantastic ability, Increase Spite. When this Pokemon is knocked out, search your deck for up to 2 Haunter and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. This is really a nice throwback to something like Water Duplicates from the Frogadier that we saw on the old Greninja-based deck, and that was kind of pushing that archetype, basically helping you cheat out your evolutions. This Ghastly is going to be a great way to cheat Haunters into play. Either the opponent knocks out Ghastly, and you can get those Haunters nice and easily, or they don't knock out Ghastly, and they haven't taken a prize, which is also very, very good for you. So having the option to cheat your Haunters into play is very nice. What are we going to do when these Haunters are into play? Well, the new Haunter has Sinister Fog for a Psychic, your opponent's active is now poisoned, and you put 1 counter on each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. I think this will be a 1 of, or a 2 of, in the deck when you play 1 or 2 copies of the Pain Amplifier Haunter that we have from Crimson Invasion, which also has, for a Psychic Energy cost, 2 damage on each of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. So this guy's the initial spreader, and then you move into the Haunter, which essentially does the same thing as a Tapu Koko, but it's placing damage rather than doing damage, so you don't get cut off by the Mew from this set as well. So the entire deck's placing damage counters. We're going to try and go down this spread route. We're able to poison the active, and then the Haunter can effectively, if your opponent has a full bench, put that flying flip based attack off on people, which is awesome. And then we move into these 2 Gengars, which again adds extra abilities to put even more damage counters into play. Essentially, the entire deck is going to be spreading damage counters as much as you can. The ability from the new Gengar is Shadow Pain. You can use this ability once during a turn when you put him down. You do 6 counters on your opponent's EX and GX in any way that you like. So again, the flexibility here is awesome. This is where it starts looking more interesting than just a Coco-based spread deck. Why play all this Stage 2 nonsense when you could just be flying flipping this whole time? Well, the idea is we can control damage with the Shadow Pain ability, and we also gain the ability of Gnawing Curse from the other Gengar, which says whenever your opponent attaches an energy from their hand to one of their Pokemon, put 2 damage counters onto that Pokemon. Do bear in mind that Welder attaches energy from hand, so if you're up against fire decks, this Gengar will be stacking up huge amounts of damage counters. So maybe I can foresee there are going to be 4 copies of this Ghastly, a 2-2 split of the Haunters, and then a 2-2 split of the Gengars, where you get these out into play so that when your opponent's attaching energy cards, you're getting damage counters, you're evolving and getting GXs and EXs damaged. And then one of the other attackers we can move into is this Twilight Poison attack that does 70, and your opponent's active is now poisoned and asleep, and that's for 3 colorless, which is of course a triple boost energy. So I foresee the deck being a number of Psychic Energies, Haunters being the early attackers for spreading options, evolving up into the Gengars for future attacking threats, and adding in additional spell tags for even more control of damage counters. We have Morty as well to punish people knocking out Psychic types. We have Mysterious Treasure. We have the Psychic Lele to spread all this damage as well with Psychic Transfer. So I think there's something here. I think it's below top tier, definitely. But the amount of control that we get with spell tags and Shadow Pain really does excite me. And if there are lots of Welder-based builds, this Gengar actually gets a lot of value as well. So I think there's something here. Maybe just a little bit too clunky compared to something like just a Coco Electro Power spread deck. And that's probably where this deck will fall down from being, a higher tier deck. But there's definitely going to be a lot of fun factor here because you can do a lot of spreading and it's very difficult for your opponent to play around as well. So really fun archetype. Definitely one I want to keep my eye out for. And spell tagging the likes of your Gengars gives you like win-win opportunities where either they stay in play because their ability, or they get knocked out and spell tags start popping, and that's also awkward for the opponent. So very cool archetype overall, and I think there might just be enough of a combination of Psychic support to make spread work, and I think this may be the archetype that tries to drive that. Hypno is a Stage 1 Pokemon with the Inviting Pendulum ability. Whenever your opponent's active is knocked out, you may flip a coin. If heads, choose your opponent's new active Pokemon from their bench. So effectively, when your opponent would promote their new active, you're the one saying, no, flip this coin, heads, you bring up that chunky guy right there that I want to knock out in future, or essentially just say no to a Jirachi. There are so many Jirachi-based builds right now which take full advantage of Stellar Wish. When something's knocked out, they get a new searching option with Stellar Wish every time. Now with a Hypno, you can flip a coin. If heads, you can say, no, bring me the Zapdos instead, and force the opponent into awkward spots. I think that's the main sort of like fun factor of the Hypno, trying to deny people from Stellar Wishing as much as possible. This is obviously a Stage 1, so there's always Ditto that we have to consider. Maybe this is a one-of index. But for me, it's a big no. The fact that you flip coins is the biggest reason that I have to say this is bad. There's also the option, of course, that this isn't just when you take knockouts from attacks. You can do it with the likes of Decidueye, maybe ping down the opponent's active, and then in the same turn, you can make sure you hit into another GX Pokemon or something like that. Make sure you can hit the threat that you want to. But there's really no bench space for a Hypno in a Decidueye-based deck. If you're playing Stage 1s, it's probably going to be Zoroark instead. So I think Hypno, obviously, is just going to fall a little bit flat right now. We move on to a Marshadow, which is a really awesome tech basic from the set. It has the ability Reset Hole. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may discard any stadium in play. If you do, put this Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your discard pile. So it's like a Field Blower, but it's searchable, and you can just put it onto your board on turn 1, and then at any point in the game, you can just discard him if there's a stadium that is annoying you. So that's what's really awesome. It's a field blower at the right time, and that's what's really, really awesome. Obviously limited to only stadium cards, but the fact that it's so searchable means you're going to have far less of a headache against that sort of stuff, which is really huge. And obviously field blower doesn't get around Prism Star stadium cards. Marshadow very much does, so that's very strong. It also comes with the additional help of Red Knuckles. Its attack, for 1 colorless energy, you do 10, and if your opponent's active is an Ultra Beast, this does 60 more damage. So doing 70 base, if you slap a Choice Band on, you're knocking out Buzzwole GX. You're knocking out Baby Buzzwole without the help of any damage modifiers as well. So Marshadow is a fantastic tech card, which I imagine we'll see play in Zoroark at the very least, because it gives you options against Buzzwole as a 1-card tech option that also helps as being an extra field blower in the deck as well. So I think at the very least this sees play in Zoroark, but it could see play in a bunch of other decks as well. The community do put this at a 4-star. I think this is only really necessary if Buzzwole does remain relevant in the format. If Buzzwole isn't relevant, there's still the question mark of whether this is better than field blower or not, because obviously Marshadow can't get rid of tool cards. And there are going to be some archetypes out there like Baby Blounds, which will play heavy Wishful Baton. Even maybe like Quagnag base builds will play Baton as well. So there are reasons to still play Blower over Marshadow. It's just whether or not the Buzzwole factor is going to be big enough to push Marshadow into Zoroark decks or not. That's the biggest question mark for Marshadow. That's why I'm giving it 3 stars, as definitely a great tech option, but only really necessary if Buzzwole stays around and if Field Blower is weaker than Marshadow in the format. We move on to another nice basic Pokemon. Already just mentioned this Mew earlier when talking about the Spread Psychic deck. It is basically a Mr. Mime reprint. It has the ability Bench Barrier, prevent all damage done to your bench Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks. So that's pretty nice. Just giving us Bench Barrier back is going to be a big relief against some of these attackers. I've already mentioned how Dugong might be plaguing some decks by doing those early 60-60 snipes. Well, getting a Mew on your board can protect you from that at the very least. And there's some other big Wombo Combo GX attacks like Magikarp Warlord. The Wombo Combo from Hitmontop as well can be huge. So having answers to these sorts of things as a 1-card tech option does seem very nice. Mew's a nice, 1 retreat cost, so it's never an awful lead for you. It even has a nice colorless attack in Psycho Power, which puts 3 counters on your opponent's Pokemon. So in random spots, that can just be beneficial for you. So it's Mr. Mime with a potentially relevant attack. What's not to like? It's also even Elm searchable because it has 60 hit points. So great news. Mew is pretty nice. Mewtwo also comes with a throwback to Versus Seeker. Its ability is Mind Report. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may choose a supporter card in your discard pile, show it to your opponent, and put it on top of your deck. So it's essentially a great way to recover. Obviously, comparing it right now to Palpad, which is only ever a shuffle effect, or something like a Delcatty, which is a stage 1, which hasn't really seen play. This Mewtwo seems much more searchable, and obviously we have great synergy from the top of the deck. We can draw cards with the likes of Zoroark, we can draw cards with Acrobike, draw cards with Judge's Whistle. There's all sorts of ways we can get the supporter immediately into our hand. So recovering an Acerola at the right time, recovering a Guzma at the right time. Mewtwo could be a fantastic card, especially for Zoroark decks in particular, just to recover the supporter at the right time that you need it, which is absolutely absurd. I think the fact that we have Giovanni's Exile as well, I mentioned it right at the start of the video, this supporter card. This has great synergy with the Mewtwo. I think Mewtwo will go into these mill archetypes because you can Exile and then use the Mewtwo again to get another Exile on top of your deck for next turn, or get another draw supporter on top of your deck for next turn. That could always be very helpful for you. We're obviously a Psychic type, so you can have that Mysterious Treasure synergy that I've mentioned. Maybe it's one of those things that Salazzle plays to recover a Welder on top of your deck. If you play the Psychic Salandits, you can treasure Mewtwo back. Mewtwo puts a Welder on top, then you can Salazzle to get the Welder back into your hand and reuse it that turn, which could be insane. It could also mean that you play a fewer count of Guzma and just have 2 copies of Mewtwo in your deck instead. If you go down a treasure route, that's something I want to explore. I think it sounds very cool. So yeah, Mewtwo, very, very nice. Treasurable for the Fire deck, believe it or not. Also helpful for maybe some Psychic decks, like the Gengar deck could be playing it if they play high treasures anyway. It can help your consistency. Even stuff like Quagnag, even like Blounds can put a treasure or 2 in their deck because they're playing Nagas. and you can have a Mewtwo in here as like a one-of. So I think just having that versatility is insane. Even if you don't have a deck that can put the supporter immediately into your hand, you can just have a nice supporter for next turn and secure yourself game, basically. If you need a Guzma for game and you just pay a Mewtwo that turn and just put it there for next turn, you can just guarantee win and force the opponent to, shuffle your hand or whatever. So that Mewtwo, absolutely insane card. I'm surprised the community only gave this a 2-star. I think it has much more versatility. At the very least, it's versatile in Zoroark. I think the biggest sort of reason why they're not rating it is because it's a basic and Zoro has to play Muck a lot of the time in current standard. But Zapdos may get much worse in the format just because of Baby Blounds. So if Zoroark doesn't have to play Muck, then Mewtwo gets far stronger in Zoroark and in a bunch of other decks as well. So I think Mewtwo is very much worth a 3-star rating. Moving on to Mismagius. I think this is one of the most overrated cards of the set. It was rated a 4-star by 27% of the community. There was a lot of there's a lot of people thinking different things about Mismagius. There's a few people that thought it was a 5-star, a few people thought it was a 1-star. I'm on the category of 1-star. I think giving up a prize card to your opponent is really, really bad, obviously. And it really has to have a huge payoff. This Mismagius has Mysterious Message. Once during your turn, you may knock out this Pokemon. If you do, draw cards from your deck until you have 7 cards in your hand. So it's similar to like a Lily style effect, but you gain 1 more card. As we know, in the mid-game, Lily is pretty much awful. You never really want to use Lily unless you're one of these decks that plays so much discarding cards, like Ultra Balls and Treasures everywhere, which is something to bear in mind. So Lily is like weak in the mid-game, and that's what Mismagius is basically going to be doing. I think the issue that I have is obviously 1, you're giving up prize cards to the opponent, which is always awful. 2, is that you're having to set up a stage 1 to do that. So you're gaining hand advantage, but you've already spent resources trying to get this stage 1 into play. You've had to search out your Misdreavus, you've had to search out this Mismagius. Obviously, we do have the Dusk Stone, which could synergize with this. But overall, because you're having to search this stuff out, it really feels bad to me. The one thing that is worth noting is that if we are playing this Turbo Honchkrow deck, you could also play Mismagius in the build to help you search out your early DCEs to make sure you can unfair GX on turn 1. So Mismagius may see play in the Turbo Honchkrow deck exactly, and that may be where some of these points are coming from, because people believe in the Turbo Honchkrow based deck. But overall, I think the fact that you're giving your opponent prizes is just so detrimental. This may be a different story when the reset stamp comes out in standard, but that's currently not the case, and that's why there's basically no benefit to this card. You could argue that we have things like Beastring that you can try and activate earlier, but we already have Electro GX to try and do that, and that's seen no play. There are a few other nice counter-based cards that we can try and take advantage of, but overall, I think this is all too weak of a package. The only way I see this Mismagius working is in a Turbo Honchkrow-based build, and even then, I think I wouldn't want to play it, because giving your opponents a faster win condition is always bad for you, and having to spend resources setting this up could be spent setting up other more reliable engines which work for the entire game, and don't give your opponent prize cards. So yeah, Mismagius, really terrible for me. Overrated card for sure, in my opinion. Muck and Alola Muck GX is unfortunately a pretty weak GX Pokemon. 270 hit points on a basic. It's a Psychic type that's also weak to Psychic, which is a bit of a shame because there are some powerful Psychic Pokemon out right now. It comes with 3 attacks. Bad Poison for Psychic and 2 Colorless. Your opponent's active is now poisoned. Put 8 counters instead of 1 between turns. So effectively you're doing at least 80 damage with the potential upside of going up to 160. However, 160 isn't a good number. 160 is not knocking out anything other than a Dedenne, basically. So that's really weak, in terms of GXs at least. So this isn't even a 2-shot based attack, really. It kind of is, just because they'll die, like, if you attack them, they stay in play, then you attack them again. Well, you don't even have to attack them again. You can just do anything and pass, and they'll get knocked out. But anytime your opponent moves out of this, you're not even 2-shotting them, because you're doing 8, then you do 8 again if they've moved out and got back into the active. And, oh look, they're at 160 and you still haven't knocked them out, which is terrible. And we can't even use things like Choice Band to increase that damage, because all damage counters from poison. Its second attack, Poison Lick, for Psychic and 3 colors, does 120. And if the opponent's active is poisoned, you heal 100 from this Pokemon. The healing aspect is kind of nice, but the fact that you're trying to do this bad poison, they stay in play, then you Poison Lick them, it's too much really. So I'm basically reading this card as 4 energy, 120, and that sounds absolutely abysmal. And then Sticky Mix GX is a free GX attack, as is often the case with Alolan Pokemon. And it just says your opponent's active is now poisoned and paralyzed. But if this Pokemon has an additional 4 energy attached to it, you can put 15 damage counters instead of 1 onto that Pokemon between turns for poison. Bit of a meme. I feel like it's really bad. It's weak to Psychic, so a Giratina can knock this out if they Distortion Door it for 1 damage counter, Choice Band, and knock you out all at once, let alone a bunch of other Psychic Pokemon that can knock it out. So I think all of his attacks are just terrible. I think this is just a meme-worthy card. 1 star for me. Next up, we move on to Weezing. It's a 120 hit point Psychic type, Stage 1. And similar to the sort of Gengar package, this guy is also trying to push a spreading archetype. Its ability is Detention Gas. At any time between turns, if this Pokemon is your active, put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's basic Pokemon. Really, really nice ability, to be honest. It's a Shrine of Punishment, but for basics, forcing your opponent to evolve up quickly, and also punishing pure basic-based builds. Obviously, there's going to be like the Baby Blounds deck. There's going to be the there's like Zapdos-based decks. There's all sorts of things that you can catch with this Detention Gas ability, which is really, really strong, especially because his own attack is also trying to do some spreading. Scatter Sludge for 2 colors does 40 and 20 to each of your opponent's benched Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. So the idea is Detention Gas or Shrine, one of the 2 things will put counters all over the place, or you can just do early Flying Flips and then move into this Weezing, because this is essentially a bigger version of Flying Flip. You do 40 to the active instead of 20, and you're also in the active position trying to do Detention Gas, catching like things like Lele, catching other basics this entire game and racking up damage counters. Do not underestimate how powerful this ability really is. If we are seeing lots of these quad tag team decks, if we're seeing Blacephalon, if we're seeing Zapdos all succeed, that's going to be absolutely nuts. This Weezing, in addition to a Shrine in some cases, could be putting so much damage on the opponent's side of the field, pretty much as much damage as his own attack. You can be getting free Flying Flips in between your attacks, which is absolutely insane. So I really think this ability is very strong, as long as there's enough basic Pokemon to go around. If there's a lot of basic archetypes out there. Also, it can take advantage of Treasure for such ability, Spell Tag for making these damage counters work the way you want to. We have the option for 4 DCE, 4 counter, and even 4 triple boost with this deck as well. So I think this Weezing has potential. It's up to me to decide whether Weezing or Gengar will be the stronger of the 2 Psychic Spread decks, but both of them seem to have some viability behind them. I think Weezing will be more likely, more consistent, but it's really down to the format to see how many all basic decks are out there for Detention Gas to do enough to clock up value compared to the Gengar deck, which would rather see more GX-based builds for the Gengar's ability as well. So 2 spreading Psychic decks, both of them seem reasonable. I don't know how strong. I don't think they're top tier stuff. So at the moment, I've put them conservatively at 2 stars, just because we've seen Coco spreading decks not be all that successful, and they already have like Electro Powers to buff their damage. They're not doing too much right now in the format. So that's the main reason why I'm sort of leaning conservatively at Weezing and Gengar, but they both have some mild potential there, I feel. We move on to the fighting types. Crabominable's the first of which. I've already mentioned this a couple times already with the Giovanni's Exile option, and also with that Gloom that we talked about. It's a 140 hit point Stage 1, which is very nice and tanky, and it's a fighting type, which is also still going to be very good in this format. Pikarom and Zoroark, I think, are going nowhere. Fight Alone for a double colors does 30 base, and if you have fewer Pokemon in play than your opponent, you do 60 more for each fewer you have. So, for example, the opponent has 4 Pokemon in play, 4 benched Pokemon in play, you only have 2, that means that you're getting an additional 120 damage for your Fight Alone, pushing Fight Alone to 150 base, slap that Choice Band on, take the knockout. That's the idea with Crabominable. You're going to try and force a big disparity with bench. Either you're using good early setup Pokemon plus Giovanni to remove your own Pokemon from play, or you're just going for a quad Crabominable deck, having something like a green search draw engine to make sure you can get extra Crabrawlers onto the board. We have, again, DCEs, triple boosts, and counter energies to make sure this is more chainable than the previous card that had the Fight Alone attack, which was Lucario. Lucario was only ever a rogue option, but he required a metal colorless attack and was far less tanky and was a less relevant type, whereas Crabominable is a very, very relevant type, tankier, and we have much easier ways to attack and chain attacks with him, thanks to the likes of Triple Boost and DC as well. So I think this has actually a good amount of potential. I was very close to putting this up to a 3-star. I think the awkwardness is that there might be some other quad-based builds like Baby Blounds, and if Baby Blounds is going to be successful, Fight Alone is pretty terrible. But Crab is going to be strong against other Zoroark-based builds and Pikarom as well, because they have to put down like Zeraoras and stuff. So I can see him being a good type coverage, pretty much thrown out of the meta because of Baby Blacephalon. But other than that, he has some nice type coverage, and he can hit hard. So alongside of Giovanni's engine, he could be a pretty interesting build to try out. Diglett is the milling card for this Giovanni's Exile. Its ability is Underground Work. If this Pokemon is discarded by the effect of a Giovanni's Exile, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. So the idea is you exile away 2 Digletts, and you get to mill 2 cards from the opponent's deck. At the same time, you're powering up that Rhydon attack. So in theory, a Giovanni's Exile can help you mill 7 cards in a turn. And that's really strong, to be fair. I think the biggest issue with the Diglett is, of course, that Giovanni's Exile may not be able to be used every single turn. You might have to use supporter cards to help you, stretch it back in, Brooklet Hill back out the Digletts, and get rolling all over again. So I feel like the Exile deck won't be able to do it every single turn, but on the turns you will, the Diglett will be in the build as well. So I think Diglett is definitely in the Giovanni's deck. I just think it's sub-top tier for sure. Hitmontop we've already mentioned with the Dojo. It has the finished combo attack for a fighting. It can only be used if Hitmonlee used special combo during the last turn. Special combo can only be used if you used hit and run the turn before. So you hit and run, then you special combo, then you finish the combo with the Hitmontop. The big payoff after 3 turns of attacking is you get to do 60 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. Really does remind me of Rule of Evil Weavile. Obviously this hits everything and it's only your opponent's side. So doing 60 to everything is very, very threatening. Obviously you're knocking out baby basics that are trying to evolve a lot of the time. You're knocking out you're knocking out those, and you're putting damage across the board as well. So the idea is you do this for a bunch of damage, especially if you have the Fighting Dojo in play. You can do 100 to everything as well. So it's almost like doing a Magikarp Wailord spread on a non-GX for 1 attachment. So when you put it that way, it sounds pretty nuts. And I think the idea of the deck will be you're hit and running into these annoying wall Pokemon, biding your time so that you can do a Hitmonlee attack into a finished combo attack. And then after all of that nonsense, you do a magical swap to try and win the game. It's a little bit convoluted. It's going to take 4 turns to set up. And if at any moment you miss, like if you miss the Hitmonlee, if you miss the Hitmontop, you just lose the game. So you can get really hurt by some hand disruption turns. And even once you've done a finished combo, that's not really game over. You still have to get a magical swap after that fact as well. So all of that means it's going to be a little bit convoluted, a little bit clunky. I think Hitmonchan is a little bit pushed by this Fighting Dojo. It does push his damage quite nicely. Hit and Run now doing 60 with this and Diancie all in play. So the Hitmonchan does have a lot better early pressure at the very least. And we do have some annoying walls in Hooper and Goomy. We've seen how this has been successful in Expanded, but I still think it's a little bit off the boil in Standard, to be honest. And I think the Hitmontop is a little bit slow to round things off, but he can be a really nice highlight reel payoff moment when we do get the special combo rolling. Marshalloma Machamp GX is a big fighting type basic with 270 hit points again. It has 3 attacks. The first is Revenge. For a fighting colorless, you do 30. And if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during last turn, this does 90 more damage. So 120 is a fantastic number for a fighting Pokemon to be hitting. That means you're one-shotting Zoros. That means you're one-shotting Pikaroms. And that's all you want, really, from a fighting type. This guy really is a nice throwback to Terrakion, in my opinion. Way back when, this Terrakion was the answer to Darkrai EXs, and now we have a big, bad version of knocking out other fighting weak Pokemon in Zoroark and Pikarom. This Revenge attack is actually very strong, in my opinion. We have Counter Gain that can potentially go into Zoroark decks. In a similar way that we've seen Zoroark play Lycanroc, we may end up having to move towards water support to help out against the fire decks, which then means that you don't have as much space to also fit a Lycanroc. So now you just have the one space committed to this one card, and you still have a nice Mirror Tech option. That's the way I foresee this card going. Also, this could be a nice Mirror Tech card in Pikarom itself. If you go down the Viridian Forest route, similar to how we see Zapdos Lycanroc currently, we could have Pikarom or even Zapdos with Marshalloma Machamp as well, because you can use Dance of the Ancients to fulfill that colorless cost and then just Viridian and Find a Fighting and do a big revenge knockout attack on the Zoroark players. So I really do think this is a big card at helping you deal with Zoroark, especially if you do play those Viridians. You could then, tank a hit because, you're huge. You Viridian, find another fighting, go straight into 100 impact. With that fighting colorless cost, you do 160, and that's, again, knocking out another fighting weak Pokemon very, very easily. Or you slap the Choice Band on, you're hitting 190, you're hitting non-GXs for knockouts as well. So I think this card is being slept on a little bit by the community. I think he's very strong. A potential include in Zoro, a potential include in some of these Lightning plus fighting, like tech-based builds. We've seen how Zapdos Lycanrocs worked. We've seen Pikarom and how it can add in its own fighting stuff as well, and I can foresee that being the case. It also has the Extremity of Stalwart GX attack. For fighting colorless, you do 200 damage. And if this has one more energy attached to it, if this Pokemon would be knocked out by damage from an attack during your opponent's next turn, it's not knocked out, and its hit points instead becomes 10. I don't see a way for us to use that. I think if you've manually attached your way up to 4 energy on this card, you've probably already won the game, because fighting doesn't have much acceleration. I only ever see you going from Revenge into one of these 2 other attacks. But still, fighting colorless for 200, that's already very good. So you can just finish things off as well. Similar to how 100 impact can be your follow-up attack after a Revenge. So I think this card's just reasonable for Revenge alone. And if you tank a hit and attach another energy, you win the game. So I think this card's just a really nice fighting tech answer, as long as Pikarom and Zoroark remain relevant, which I really don't see them going anywhere. Quagsire, oh man, I love this Quagsire. It's so simple and so effective. No text on this guy at all. He just has 2 attacks. He's a fighting type with water attacks. 1 for 20 or 3 for 120. And 3 for 120 is a magic number. As we just mentioned with the Marshall Machamp, it can help knock out Pikaroms. It can help knock out Zoroarks. And Quagsire is getting a lot from this set just because fire is going to be much more dominant. So having fire and fighting, having water and fighting coverage now means Quagnag has so much more potential. Currently, Quagnag is playing Onix. Onix requires 1 more energy, which is always awkward because when your stuff gets knocked out, you have to replenish it with multiple Naggers and Aqua Patches and whatnot. And also, he's a horrible, horrible basic for you to start with because he has a 4 retreat cost. Now, we can just thicken our Quagsire line, make us, in theory, more consistent at getting our main Quagsire going in most matchups, whilst also having this extra Quagsire for type coverage. I think Quagnag will end up becoming a tier 2 archetype, thanks to his type coverage alone, and this Quagsire will be in that deck. That's why I'm going to give him a 3-star. I think the water deck won't quite push its way into top tier, but I think this Quagsire does push the overall Quagsire-based archetypes into tier 2, and that's why it's going to get the 3-star rating from me. Rhydon, as mentioned with the Diglett, has this DC attack which synergizes with the Giovanni card. Dirty Work says, discard the top card of your opponent's deck. If you played a Giovanni from your hand during this turn, discard the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck instead of 1. The idea here is we're going to be milling a bunch. Rhydon, of course, does evolve into Rhyperior, which already has a milling ability in Toppling Wind. So I foresee us having a thick Rhydon line with a couple Digletts in the build, heavy Giovanni, also playing Shining Celebi, Counter Energies, DCEs, all that good stuff. So you can evolve into Rhyperiors, get your Toppling Winds going, and also attack with Dirty Work in those turns. Even if you're not using Giovanni on that turn, it's extra discards in general, just the 1, which doesn't sound all that strong, but on some turns you can have to accept the fact that you're having to dig for energy cards, having to dig for evolution pieces along the way. So I think it's something we have to accept. But on key turns, this is absolutely a huge discard, very, very scary. It's actually the same amount as a Magcargo's GX attack for 1 fire energy. So Dirty Work, definitely strong, definitely something to be a threat. I think the archetype, again, will be a little bit slow because we can't use too much of a supporter-based draw engine because we have to use our Giovannis this whole time. So that's the main thing the deck has to work around, but the potential of mill is really, really high. Also, quick note, we have a Rhyhorn, which has over 80 hit points now, which is definitely good to note as well, because obviously Zapdos players will otherwise grinch down the Rhyhorns a lot easier. So now we have an extra 10 hit points. Hooray, new Rhyhorn, great work. Stack Attacker is a basic fighting type with 120 hit points. It's an Ultra Beast with the ability Stone Fence. If your opponent has 3 or less prize cards remaining, this Pokemon's maximum hit points gets up to 200, so we gain an additional 80. And it has the top-down attack. For 2 fighting and a colorless, you do 110 damage. Flip a coin until you get tails. For each heads, discard a card from the top of your opponent's deck. Not very reliable mill, but the idea here is, again, you're a fighting type. You can Beast Ring, and we can have additional answers to Zoroark. I think overall this is simply outclassed by Sledgehammer. The big payoff of a Stack Attacker is that, you know, you can have those 3 energies onto him, and then Stone Fence means he's tanky. But Zoroark plays Muck a lot of the time anyway, so he just won't be tanky. He'll actually be easier to knock out than a Buzzwole. So I think overall outclassed by Sledgehammer, especially because Sledgehammer's just good turn 1 anyway sometimes for early pressure. So yeah, overall outclassed by Baby Buzz. We move on to the Dark types, and Greninja Zoroark is one of the saddest 1-stars I've had to give this set review. I like both of these cards, just not together, unfortunately. 250 hit points on a basic tag team with 2 attacks. The first is Dark Pulse. For a Dark and Colorless, you do 30, plus 30 more for each Dark Energy attached to your Pokemon. So just for his own attack cost, you're doing a base of 90, and then cream on top for every other energy that you can get into play. The ways we get energies into play, Darkrai Prism Star can get 2 from your hand and just put him down straight away. Darkrai GX can Restoration, and then the idea is we're going to have either things like Naga or Sharpedo to get extra attachments, and the likes of Baton and EXP Share to retain them in play. My biggest issue, speed. You cannot keep up with the Fire decks. The Fire decks will absolutely run face on you. I also think that Pikarom will outspeed you, and I think there are too many non-GX decks where we have just basically no backup mechanic at all to win those games. So I think Greninja Zoroark has no option at beating non-GXs and is slower than the other tag team routes that we have. That's the reason why I can only ever give this a 1-star. I feel like it has basically the same feel as a Turbo Ray. That's why there's a little Rayquaza up here. This is basically Turbo Ray. Turbo Ray isn't working right now, and it's just a 2-prize Pokemon, so it's even more bodied by non-GXs because you're a tag team, so that's absolutely horrible. Also, Night Unison GX is worth noting. Put 2 in any combination of Dark Pokemon GX or EX from your discard pile onto your bench. If this Pokemon has at least 1 extra energy, attach 2 energy cards from your discard to each of those Pokemon. The idea is you get 2 energy, you Night Unison 2 Incineroars onto play, so you can Scar Charge for a bunch of energy acceleration. Again, super slow. It reminds me of Ho-Oh's GX attack. Way, way, way too slow. We can't ever get away with doing that. If you Night Unison on turn 2 and just take a hit, even if you're getting a response one-shot, like, it feels so bad. It just feels so awkward. Obviously, your damage will, like, stay there for the rest of the game, obviously, because Incineroar can Sky Charge every single turn, and it does help thin out your deck, of course, but it just feels way too slow for me. Definitely not going to be very strong, in my opinion. I think just a 1-star. Maybe some experimentation. Maybe this is worth a 2-star just because enough people want to play Zoroark and Greninja in a deck, but it feels like an even worse version of Turbo Ray, in my opinion. The Dark Greninja Stage 2 is a 130 hit point Dark type that has Bring Down for 2 colorless energy. Choose 1 Pokemon, yours or your opponent's, with the fewest remaining hit points, excluding this one, and that Pokemon is now knocked out. I think the idea here is for the DCE cost, you're going to try and use things like these Shurikens and even the new Detective Pikachu Greninja to spread damage into the right places and then bring down to take prizes. I think the biggest problem is you'll just run out of damage with your Shurikens. I think this is just too slow overall. This bring down attack was previously successful on a Gardevoir level X, but I feel like it's just far weaker these days, especially because you'll often be the Pokemon with the fewest remaining hit points as well. So yeah, I think this Greninja is overall a little bit weak, just too slow in my opinion, especially because this has the name Greninja, and we're trying to use Greninjas to actually deal damage this whole time, so it just feels too slow overall. Honchkrow has huge potential, and I'm honestly scared about this card. I think this card is very, very strong and really awkward for the game. I don't want to come up against this Honchkrow. I'm sure none of you want to come up against it either. It's a 210 hit point Dark type with the ability Ruler of the Night. As long as this Pokemon is your active, your opponent can't play any tools, special energy, or stadiums from their hand. This is a throwback to Giratina's Chaos Wheel attack in an ability now. Obviously, your opponent can gust around the Honchkrow in a similar way they can gust around Trevenant in Expanded. But as we know, that's very awkward. They have to have the combination of these cards in their hand as well as a Guzma all at once. It comes along with 2 attacks. The first is Featherstorm for a Dark and 2 colorless. You do 90 and 30 to 2 of your opponent's benched GX or EXs. So it's similar to a Night Spear from way back when. It's just, if you're up against GX decks, you get an extra ping of 30. If you're not against GXs, you're just doing 90 for 3, which is very slow and terrible. But that doesn't matter because Unfair GX is the selling point here. For 2 colorless, your opponent reveals their hand. Discard 2 cards from it. You get to choose the 2 best cards in your opponent's hand, get rid of them, essentially leave them supporterless is the idea most times, so that they can't draw any more cards and they just brick. So the idea is either we're going to play a Zoroark base build, where Honchkrow is not weak to fighting. In fact, it resists it instead, giving you nice type coverage in a full-on Dark base build, where you have this unfair GX stack option to, just ruin your opponent at any point in the game. Or we're going to have a Turbo Honchkrow base build, where we go early Dusk Stones, get this guy out as early as possible, let loose the opponent, unfair GX, leave them with nothing, attack with Featherstorm twice, and you win the game. That's a horrible prospect that's an actual option in the game these days. I really don't want to come up against this card. It's very uninteractive and unfun to deal with, especially because its own ability limits your opponent's hand even more, because they can't play like a third of their deck a lot of the time. Well, not really a third, but a number of cards in their deck a lot of the time, which is huge. So this Honchkrow, very, very awkward to deal with. Unfair GX is going to ruin so many people's days on ladder at the very least. And I think it's just going to be very strong. Unfair is just so hard to interact with this card. Essentially, any of these green search-based decks, which don't have abilities, all really suffer from this Honchkrow. At the same time, because you have the ability, you can just lock your own stadium into play as well. This can lock in Black Market Prism Star into play as well, which is very, very scary. So all that stuff makes Honchkrow seem very, very scary and strong. And the Dusk Stone seems very boring to deal with. So yeah, annoying card. I don't like seeing this. The good news is it's weak to Lightning, so hopefully the likes of Zapdos, Jolteon can keep it in check and Pikarom. Because especially, the Jolteon can deal with it very, very quickly. And even if you're getting hit with Unfair GX, you're so likely to draw into at least like an energy card and keep pressuring the Honchkrow. That's my hope and dream, that the Lightning stuff keeps this Honchkrow at bay. Sharpedo, I mentioned it alongside the Greninja Zoroark. Obviously, I think Greninja Zoroark will flop, and I actually think the Sharpedo is worse than just playing Naga. Naga is a psychic type with guaranteed attachments, and also it can, help your type coverage because it can help deal with some fighting types. Sharpedo can't do any of that. He just has Greedy Evolution. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve, you may look at the top 6 cards of your deck, choose any Dark Energy you find there and attach them to this Pokemon, then shuffle those other cards back into your deck. So it's like a Max Elixir. Obviously, we've seen Blastoise. It's a stage 2, of course, but it can do that every single turn. And this Sharpedo only does it once, which is a little bit awkward. Attaching it to itself is also sad because it's so squishy and can get knocked out really easily, which is a shame. And ultimately, I just see Greninja flopping anyway, so I don't see a place for Sharpedo. His attack is also too slow. Spiritomb, I've already mentioned how Stunfisk will flop, and that's why I think Spiritomb is absolutely terrible. Building Spikes, once during your turn, you may put a damage counter on this Pokemon. Really not going to be all that good for you. So the idea is if you get 5 damage onto this guy, the maximum, your Anguished Scream for a Dark does 10 and 30 more for each damage counter on this Pokemon. So with Choice Band, sure, you can one-shot some stuff, but, why is your opponent letting you get that many damage counters on you? And at the same time, if your opponent just plays any spreading option, you're just going to get wrecked anyway. So this Spiritomb really does, not inspire me at all. And it also gets shut down by Muck as well, so extra reason to hate this card. 1 star from me. Alolan Dugtrio is the first metal type here. It has the ability Hair Wall. Any damage done to your metal Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's active is reduced by 10. Now, this is obviously very weak. We already have Frying Pan, which can reduce 30 in a tool rather than a stage 1. We also have the Lucario Melmetal, which I'll talk about in a moment, which can do extra reduction. But the idea is here, just having so much reduction all at once starts adding up. If you do the GX attack of Lucario, if you put on the Frying Pan, and if you start adding Dugtrios into the mix, you can be, minusing so much damage from the opponent in a stalling-based deck. Could be very, very awkward for them. At the same time, we have another Alolan Dugtrio, which can also help out stalling decks because of the Tangling Hair ability, adding the retreat cost of your opponent's Pokemon by 1. So the idea is you play a split of these Dugtrios, give yourself extra tank ability, and force the opponent into having more stalling targets whenever they bench stuff as well. So maybe there's something here. Overall, I think they're just too slow, and Mill doesn't have enough draw support to supplement having multiple stage 1s which don't draw us cards. And that also, the Diglets themselves are very easy prizes to take, which is horrible in Mill. That's the reason why Alolan Dugtrio is bad, but you could potentially see them getting shoehorned in just because, like how Celosaur plays the baby Shamans just to give yourself healing, these Dugtrios gives you extra reduction on top of everything else. So that's the sort of theory behind it right now, because they're stage 1s, they're just a little bit too slow. Genesect is a basic 130 hit point metal type that has the ability High Speed Flight Form. If your opponent has any GX or EX in play, this Pokemon has no retreat cost. Typically, it will have a 2 retreat cost, but it can get minus down to 0, which is pretty fun, giving yourself a nice pivoting option in a metal deck. It has Sprit Beam for metal and 2 colorless, you do 30, and this is 30 to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's a throwback to old Registeel EX, which could do that for 3 colorless. This time it's a little bit less flexible with that 1 metal energy cost, but it is, of course, a non-GX, which is a little bit bonus points. This was played in the Lucario Melmetal successful list in Japan, potentially just as a pivoting option for you when you're doing your Acerola shenanigans, but also the fact is, once you've used the GX attack of the Lucario Melmetal, this guy essentially becomes a 160 hit point non-GX, and that's awkward, and he could become a Acerola target in his own right. However, I think it's pretty weak. He's a bad starting Pokemon as long as you're up against non-GX decks, or even in the early turns, he's just a weak start for you, and he's not all that tanky in general. I don't see you building up to Sprit Beams in stalling archetypes, and I don't think he's strong enough in aggressive base builds either, so just a 1-star for me for the Genesect. We do move on to the Lucario Melmetal GX. This ended up, I believe it came second in this massive Japanese tournament when Full Metal Wall first came out. The big issue with Full Metal Wall is that it was pre-Double Blaze in Japan, which means the fire stuff wasn't out yet. Now the fire stuff is out, I have to give this only a 2-star because, again, I keep saying, fire is busted. Fire is so strong that being a tanking archetype, or a want-to-be tanking archetype, that's weak to fire is just a death sentence. Yes, we have Frying Pans, but if the fire decks want to play Field Blower, they definitely can do that, and they have Green Search to just instantly find it and wreck you. So I'm very concerned about playing Lucario Melmetal, just because, let alone the fact that it's weak to fire, there are other decks that can have answers to mill anyway. So here's what Lucario does. For a DCE, you do 50 damage and search your deck for a metal energy and attach it to this Pokemon, then shuffle your deck afterwards. It's reasonable, it's a DCE, it's good pressure, you have 260 hit points, so you can do this Acerola loop and just do 50 every turn. So the idea behind this milling archetype is that it's sort of like a pressure mill. The whole time you're doing this constant 50 and Acerolaing up and doing 50 again. Kind of reminds me of when Shaman EX was put into Warlord decks alongside Floatstone, where people just did Sky Return pressure on you the whole time. That's what this kind of feels like. You're doing this constant 50 and forcing your opponent to play cards the entire game, even though your main strategy is just using Plumerias and Lucamines and Acerolas the whole time. We do have Heavy Impact, which does for 2 metal and 2 colorless 150 damage, which is reasonable, but it's something you basically never go for. Even with Metal Fist, I don't think it's something that you try and work towards. Full Metal Wall GX is actually insane, though. For 1 colorless, until the end of this game, your metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from your opponent's attacks. If this Pokemon has at least 1 extra energy attached to it, discard all energy from your opponent's active Pokemon at the same time. So it's similar to a Lost Purge GX attack, or a Articuno using its Cold Crush GX attack. This time it's for a DCE, so it's potentially even more splashable in the likes of Zoro Control and such. And at the same time, just for that 1 colorless, you're reducing 30 damage done to your Pokemon for the entire game. Not just this turn, not just on this guy. All your metal Pokemon, the entire game, essentially have a Choice Helmet attached to them, which is absolutely nuts. On top of that, we can have Frying Pans, so effectively we could be reducing 60 done to ourselves. So this 260 goes up to 320, and again, Acerola DCE, do that the entire game, and you're laughing. When you're not against fire stuff, this is definitely a viable strategy. It's going to be very awkward for Zoroark decks to deal with a Lucario Melmetal archetype. It's going to be a little bit awkward for Gardevoir decks to deal with it as well. I think you will be able to grind out a lot of different players out there. It's just that fire is going to be insane, and to a certain extent, Pikarom could do pretty well against this as well. So I think those 2 big one-shot archetypes will be the thing keeping Lucario Melmetal from being very strong. 2-star may be a little bit harsh, but I do think that fire will be way too dominant for this to see play. I think the main way that we may end up seeing this card, whereas, you know, in Japan it was a quad build and you just used this guy and Acerola bounced, I think it's more likely that we'll see a non-GX metal deck just use this as a 1 energy attack. You use the GX attack, and then you eventually become more tanky with all your other non-GXs. You Acerola your way out of there, and you're just a non-GX for the rest of the game. I think that's the way I foresee this card seeing play, as like a 1 or 2 count in a more non-GX based metal tanking deck. Speaking of non-GX based metal tanking deck, here's Melmetal. It's a 150 hit point basic, stage 1 metal type, and it has Metal Eater. Once during a turn, you may discard a metal Pokemon from your hand, then heal 100 damage from this Pokemon. So, you Frying Pan, you GX attack, you're minusing 60 damage being done to you every single turn, and you have this Metal Eater healing 100 from yourself as well. So you can be eating up 160 damage every single turn without a scratch on you. That sounds very, very scary and powerful. So this is what I mean when I'm saying the Lucario Melmetal deck may end up having to go down this direction to see any success. Overall, I still think this is a little bit weak. I still think that you won't play many metal Pokemon anyway, so you won't always be able to use this ability. And I think Steelix is actually the better option, just because it's a DC Pokemon that can just put some pressure on Evasarolas all over again. I think that's stronger than Melmetal that will just sit there the entire game. I think this little bit of pressure from a DC tackle is going to be much stronger, and the fact that Steelix has Frying Pan to push it up and the GX attack to push it up, I think we're more likely going to see an attacking Steelix-based deck than a Melmetal deck. So that's why I'm going to give it the 1 star. However, I do foresee there potentially being a Lucario Melmetal plus Steelix-based Frying Pan 4 DCE, Lusamine, Stevens-based attacking mill strategy. We move on to the fairy types. Gardevoir Sylveon GX is one of my favorites of the set. I think this card is bananas and I can't wait to start testing with it. It's a 260 hit point fairy type tag team GX Pokemon. Weak to metal, has a nice fighting resist and a 2 retreat cost. It has 3 attacks. The first is Fairy Song. For a colorless, you search your deck for up to 2 fairy energy and attach them to your bench Pokemon in any way that you like, then shuffle your deck. It reminds me of a nice Geomancy, but this is even more flexible for 1 colorless as well. Then we move into Kaleidostorm. You do for 2 fairy and a colorless 150 damage, and you choose any number of energy attached to your Pokemon in play and rearrange them in any way that you like. So you can move them all off yourself, knowing that you can tank a hit and just Acerola, or you can move energy from the bench to yourself if your opponent can't deal with you. The reason why you would want to do that is because of the Magical Miracle GX attack. For 3 fairy, you do 200 damage, and if you have an additional 3 extra fairy attached to this Pokemon, your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck. They don't draw any new cards, they just shuffle it in. You basically give your card only a 1 top deck hand, which is absolutely horrible to play against for anyone. So the idea is Gardevoir is going to sit there doing its fairy songs, using Acerolas and max potions while you build up energies on your bench. You can use Kaleidostorm for good pressure and move that energy straight off yourself in a similar way to how Baby Articuno does it. The Articuno in the Quagsire base builds do it. You just use Kaleidostorm, tank hits, Acerola up when you have to. You have Ribombee, which stops people... Whoops. It stops people gusting up these... well, it stops people using Lysander against you, basically. So they can only touch the active Gardevoir Sylveon. That's the main way we've seen this work in Japan. And then we move into Magical Miracle and give your opponent no cards. So we have both this Gardevoir and Honchkrow, which will force the opponent basically to have unplayable hands. It's very, very disgusting and horrible to think about, but if you're the player using this deck, it's very, very powerful and strong. So Gardevoir is essentially the combination of these 3 cards all in one, White Cyclone being like a very, very weak version of Kaleidostorm. This is much more flexible and more damage as well. So big one-shots potentially on the likes of Lele's, whilst at the same time moving your energies around and retaining them and moving into Magical Miracle, which is very, very scary. We've seen Japanese lists use Jirachis. We've seen them use Marshallows for Let Loose. We've seen them use Ribombee. We've seen them use Ninetales as well alongside the Ribombee. Obviously, Ninetales can help pick out some key item cards at the right times. You can use this one to deny, GX-based decks like just Zoroark players and wall them out as well. So this little Ninetales package I foresee being good. Ribombee is pretty much staple in the Gardevoir deck. And there's a few other things that we have going our way, like the amount of Fairy Charms we can use. Acerola is going to be staple in this deck while you're doing early Fairy Songs. Mina can give you even more Fairy Energy Acceleration as well. So I think this archetype is very, very strong. Might be top tier, might just be pushed out by the Fire stuff as a tanking base build. But I think Magical Miracle is so, so strong. And it's really the only way we can punish our opponent's hand outside of Unfair GX. So I think that's absolutely absurd. And you can just win the game off of that alone. We move into Whimsicott GX, the other fairy type GX of the set. 190 hit point stage 1 with Fluffy Cotton ability. If any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, flip a coin. If heads, prevent that damage. So it's a throwback to a Cincino. There was also a Noivern that has this ability. But Cincino is much more similar in how it tries to attack. The Fairy Energy attack cost for Energy Blow just does 10 damage, but 30 more damage times the amount of energy attached to this Pokemon. So we're simply trying to buff up this Whimsicott, maybe with some Gardevoir support in the back, again with a Ribombee, or maybe just using triple boost energies to do big energy blow attacks and hope to flip heads on your coin flips. Overall, I think having to flip heads as a win condition for a deck is never something you want to try and go towards, so overall, I'm going to have to say no, this Whimsicott is pretty bad. But at the same time, if you flip heads, you're very, very happy as well. So awkward to interact with this card. We do have some nice Fairy Charms and Ribombe and stuff to maybe make this more of an anti-meta style deck. Overall, I'm not all that inspired by it. It also has the Toy Box GX attack, which just searches your deck for up to 5 cards and put them into your hand. Similar to an Algorithm GX attack, but just on a stage 1 is a little bit better. It can maybe help you move into these triple boost energy turns. It can move you into maybe some Acerola Ring as well to add into the Fluffy Cotton. Maybe get out the right... Fairy Charm at the right time, stuff like that. But overall, it does feel a little bit slow. So I'm still just going to give the Whimsicott the 1 star. I think it's too RNG dependent as a win condition. We move on to the colourless stuff with another GX here. It's going to be Celesteela GX. It has the ability Force Canceller. As long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, prevent all effects of your opponent's GX attacks, including damage done to each of your Pokemon. So there are some big GX attack finishing moves that people want to go for, the likes of Tag Bolt GX and the likes of Towering Splash. Having this guy in the active at least forces people to have Guzmas as well as everything else to finish off the game. It does have the Power Cyclone attack for 3 colourless. It does 110. Move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched. Very similar to a Y Cyclone, but given an extra 20 damage buff. All colourless as well, which is worth noting, which does make him a lot more splashable. And he has the Discovery GX attack for just 1 colourless. You count your prize cards and put them into your hand. Then take that many cards on top of your deck and put them face down as your prizes. So you're doing a Rotom deck style effect, but as your GX attack. So that's pretty weak as a GX attack, but it's an option for you. Have nothing else to do. It has a nice tanky 200 hit points. Unfortunately, it's weak to Lightning. That's one of the big reasons why I'm not a big fan of this card. I've gone all over the place with the Celesteela. At first, I thought it was insane. I thought it was like a potential tech card in a bunch of decks. But when you actually build decks, he's just like a 65th card. And when he's 65th instead of like 61st, it just means he will never see play. So I'm going to have to give him a 1 star. Very glamorous. Its ability is genuinely strong. Its attack is genuinely very splashable and reasonable. It's just reasonable doesn't quite cut it anymore when there's big one-hit heroes coming up the wazoo from Welder and whatnot. So Celesteela, overall, we have to just give the 1 star. It won't end up making final 60-card lists, unfortunately. Persian GX is a very interesting stage 1. It has 200 hit points. It's a colourless type, and it has the Catwalk ability. Once during a turn, if your Pokemon GX or EX was knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack during their last turn, you may search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. You can't use multiple Catwalks, so just 1 Persian effect. But that's still a Teammate style effect. Teammates was a very powerful supporter card in non-GX builds. This is, of course, only limited to GXs and EXs when they get knocked out. So you get less uses of a Catwalk, but when you do, you get amazing ability. That gets you triple boost energies, that gets you your next attacker ready to go, that makes sure that you can have a Guzma in hand to insta-respond on whatever your opponent does. It can do all sorts of flexible options. This ability is absolutely absurd, and it's one of the driving forces of why Persian is a playable card in my opinion. It then has the Revenge attack for 3 colours. You do 10 damage, and this attack does 20 more for each Pokemon in your discard pile, up to a maximum of 9 Pokemon. That means that Revenge can do a maximum of 190 base damage, and then you also have Choice Band on top of that as well, and any other damage buffs that you can think of. It's a throwback to Be Revenge. It's even a throwback to Night March, really, because Night March was basically capped to the same number. And it's for a triple boost energy style cost. Also, your colourless based, so it's open to other energy accelerators like Malamar if you really wanted to, or Dance to the Ancients Coco into DCE, or DCE counter gain. All that sort of stuff is live. Obviously, you can catwalk to find those combination pieces as well, so it's not as hard as you would think to try and get those rolling. So overall, I think Persian may end up being a slightly lower tier rogue archetype for literally just going for early Dedenes, binning your hand quickly, getting rid of excess Pokemon, going for revenge attacks alongside these triple boosts. But I also foresee it seeing play alongside Zoroark as kind of like an answer card to help you get into counter gains and energies to maybe answer the likes of Pika-Roms. You can just go ahead and guarantee yourself, similar to how we were played Mallow in the deck as well, to try and get the right answers at the right turns. You can also dig out things like Dugongs and whatnot in fire matchups, or Slowking as well, which may be going into decks for fire matchups. So this Persian GX, thanks to its ability alone, is very worth noting. Revenge is a nice attack to bear in mind. It also has Slashback GX, which for 3 colours does 150. You get to switch with on your bench. It's literally the same as Crossing Cut GX, but for 3 colourless. So it's a lot more splashable. Again, triple boost energy, choice band, Guzma up that Lele, take game for Zoroark. That's a really nice option as well. So that's where it has been seeing play in Japan. It's either been a quad Persian deck alongside like Dugongs and other tech Pokemon, or it's been in a Zoroark deck that also plays triple boost energy so that you can attack with this guy, similar to how Zoropod used to work. It's just you gain this catwalk ability to get out some key tech cards in the right matchups. Persian's very strong. I've only given it 3-star because it's only potentially in Zoroark, and I believe its own archetype won't be top tier, mainly because it's a fighting weak Pokemon. But I think it has the potential to be in the more popular Zoroark builds as well, so this may end up getting pushed to a 4-star, but it's only a maybe in Zoroark builds currently. Quick note as well, the Meowth can draw 2 cards, so cool. It's a nice starter for you if you really have to. We then go to the final card of the set, which is Porygon Z. It's a stage 2 colorless with 130 hit points. It has the ability Crazy Code. You may use this ability as many times as you like during your turn. Attach a special energy card from your hand to one of your Pokemon. This is the best Rain Dancer of all time, in my opinion. Rain Dancer's only ever traditionally been for a certain basic energy card. This time we gain the benefit of special energies. Special energies are literally the strongest energy cards in the game. They have the downside of being hammerable away a little bit more easily, but they have so much flexibility. Right now we can take advantage of lots of unit energies, rainbows, DCEs, and that's absolutely absurd. I'm foreseeing a big tag team toolbox based build using Porygon as the acceleration, Acerola up, and just reattach all those energies again with Crazy Code into new different attackers. If you play enough tag teams, you'll have type coverage over something, and you'll have the tankability over other decks as well. There'll be some sort of deck that simply can't one-shot you. Put that one up in the situation and just Crazy Code onto it and start swinging big. That's the entire idea behind the Porygon Z. Currently in Standard, we only have these 2 Magnazones as our Rain Dancers. There aren't many good Metal Pokemon to use this with. Lightning already has lots of basic energy acceleration, so this one's kind of been made redundant. Crazy Code is much more versatile and can take advantage of toolbox-style decks, so it will definitely be creating some very exciting rogue archetypes that's going to have a lot of different tag team tanks in there. Very, very cool archetype. I think it may just fall short on the consistency route, and obviously if you just start the wrong tag team in the wrong matchup, you can be 3 prizes down and you might just lose straight off of that. But it sounds like a lot of fun. 2 stars from me. And that's it, guys. That's the overall ratings. This has been a long video. I feel like I've been talking forever. Do apologize if I've had to sip water throughout this or blow my nose or whatnot. Sitting here for 2 hours does really kill my voice, and I can already start feeling it closing up on itself. So please do bear with me. I hope you did enjoy. Let me know your favorite cards down below. Let me know what archetypes you want to be playing, what you're scared of. What do you think of Gardevoir Sylveon? What do you think of Honchkrow? Are they healthy for the game? Are they going to be potentially problems? Are they overhyped? Will they work? How good's the fire stuff going to be? Are you going to be playing water? Let me know down below. What do you think about Green Search as well? What's your main triple boost energy target? Some of these cards are very, very flexible. Some of these cards just go straight into decks immediately off the bat. And the fire stuff, I really do think is going to be huge. Similar to how we've seen the lightning decks take over as soon as the Lost Thunder and Team Up came out. I do really think that fire now takes the mantle of being the most aggressive archetypes out there as well. I do still think the lightning stuff will work, but I think fire now becomes the tippy top tier. So yeah, overall I gave 9 5-star cards, a lot of reasonable 4s and 3s, and yeah, there's still a lot of cards that I still think will be off the boil, but still have to discuss them and why they're interesting and whatnot. So hope you did enjoy, guys. I'll leave you now with some awesome artwork. Supporters that I hope you will get to pull, so hope you did enjoy. I'm going to start some new decks as of next week. I think this week I'm going to continue with current standard, get that out of the way, ready for the European internationals, and then we will be focusing on brand new archetypes as of next week. I think on Friday I'll be talking about the impact of this set on cards as well, and like on the new standard format, so keep an eye out for that. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you in another video soon. Cheers.